He left the spy world behind. The past isn't done with him yet. Low Tide. A Spy Thriller. Chapter 1. The tide doesn't care what time you set your alarm for. And at 5:40 in the morning, it had already started pulling back from the seawall at the south end of Calusa Cay Beach, leaving behind a hard-packed shelf of sand the color of wet concrete. Mike Ramble liked this hour better than any other the day had to offer, partly because the light came in low and gold, and made everything look like it had been lit for a reason, and partly because nobody who mattered to him was awake yet to want anything. He'd bought the detector second-hand off a guy in Vero Beach who swore it had found a Spanish for-real piece once, though he couldn't produce the coin or explain why he was selling the machine that found it. Mike paid $200 for it anyway, because $200 bought him 3 hours a day of doing something with his hands that wasn't filling out a disability questionnaire or staring at the ceiling fan in his bedroom doing math on a pension that didn't exist anymore. He worked the detector in long, slow arcs, heel to toe, the way a man might mow a lawn he actually cared about. Headphones cut the gull noise down to a manageable hiss, and the surf down to something like white static, but they didn't cut the part of his brain that still ran perimeter on instinct. 2 joggers up by the access ramp, both regulars, both harmless. A man in a folding chair with a cooler set up too close to the rocks, new, hadn't been there yesterday, probably harmless. A woman walking a fat Labrador who let it swim out past where she should have, also a regular, also harmless. He didn't decide any of this consciously anymore. It just happened, the way breathing happened, the residue of 20 years spent assuming the worst about strangers until they proved otherwise. He found a fishing weight shaped like a torpedo, 2 quarters fused together with beach tar, and a Bud Light can so old the typeface looked like something from a museum. He found a man's wedding ring, 18 karat by the stamp, and stood there a minute turning it in his fingers, wondering what kind of fight or what kind of grief put a ring like that into the Atlantic Ocean. He bagged it to drop at the lost and found box at the pier bait shop, because that was the rule he'd made for himself the first month he started doing this. Jewelry goes to the box. Everything else is his. 400 yards down, past the public access, the beach narrowed where the rock jetty cut out toward the inlet, and beyond that, the masts of Tucker's Marina stood up against the brightening sky like a stand of bare winter trees, sailboats and a couple of charter rigs, and Old Man Tucker's own boat, the Conch Republic, tied up crooked the way it had been tied up crooked for as long as Mike had lived here. He didn't know Earl Tucker well. Knew him to nod to at the bait shop, knew the marina the way you know a building you walk past, a fact of the landscape, not yet a fact of his life. That would change soon enough, though on this particular Tuesday morning, with the sun coming up orange over the inlet, there was no way for Mike to know it. The detector screamed at something 3 inches down, and he crouched, working his fingers through the wet sand, until they closed around a rusted belt buckle shaped like an anchor, eaten through in 2 places, the leather long gone. He held it up, turned it over, decided it dated from sometime after Vietnam and before cell phones, and dropped it in the mesh bag with the rest of the junk that had accumulated in his garage like sediment. His garage looked like the bottom of an aquarium that had given up on itself. He kept meaning to throw the bulk of it out. He never did. There was something about a pile of objects nobody wanted that felt lately like company. He was thinking about coffee, and whether he had enough milk left to make the good kind, or whether it'd be the black kind again, when a voice came at him from behind, too loud for the hour. The particular cheerful loudness of a man who'd had 2 cups of resort coffee and know where he needed to be. Hey, I know you. Mike didn't turn right away. There was a half-second where he ran the voice through old habit, filed it under civilian, not a threat, but not nothing either, the way you might note a car alarm going off 3 streets over. Only then did he look up. 40s, soft around the middle, a golf shirt the color of a tennis ball, that had probably cost $60 at a pro shop somewhere it didn't belong on a beach vacation. Sunburn coming in hard across a scalp going thin on top. Behind him a woman stood with 2 kids and a mesh beach bag, already 3 sentences ahead in a conversation she wasn't having. The universal posture of a wife who has done this particular performance with this particular husband in 6 other states. "You're that guy," the man said, snapping his fingers like that might shake something loose between them. "The CIA guy. From the news. The hearing, though, what was it?" "Wrong guy," Mike said, and kept the detector moving. "No, hang on, you look exactly like Linda, doesn't he look exactly like?" "Bobby, leave the man alone," Linda said, not looking up from adjusting a kid's swim vest, with the flat patience of someone who'd already decided this vacation had used up its quota of interesting things and a beachcomber wasn't going to refill it. "Lot of bald guys with a tan," Mike said. "Friendly enough. Final enough." The tone he used to use closing doors on men who hadn't earned the right to keep talking, dialed down about 60% so it read as Florida friendly instead of something with an edge on it. "I swear to God, though," Bobby said, to nobody now, since Mike was already 3 steps gone, headphones back over his ears, detector swinging in its slow arc like nothing had interrupted it at all. It worked mostly. It had worked for 3 years. 6 weeks of cable news a while back had put his face on enough screens that he'd become the kind of half-familiar that itched at strangers for about 4 seconds before they either let it go or, like Bobby from wherever Bobby was from, couldn't quite manage to. Long enough to ruin a beach walk. Not long enough anymore for anyone to follow him home, take a photo, ask him on the record what it had felt like to watch a Senate committee decide his career was the most convenient thing in the room to set fire to. He gave himself another 200 yards of sand before his shoulders came down out of his ears. The house was a block and a half off A1A on a street that didn't have curbs, just grass running straight into asphalt. A 1962 concrete block bungalow with jalousie windows in the back that he never got around to replacing, and a carport instead of a garage, except he called it a garage anyway because that's where the junk lived. He rinsed the detector under the spigot by the side door, hung it on its hook, dumped the mesh bag's contents into a Folgers can that used to hold 200 Folgers cans worth of fines and now held about 400. The can itself rusted through at the seam. Inside, the window unit in the front room rattled like it was filing a complaint, and the kitchen smelled like the bananas going soft in the bowl on the counter. He checked the milk, good for 1 more day maybe, and made real coffee instead of black, because finding a wedding ring put a man in the mood for something with a little ceremony to it. He drank it standing at the window over the sink, watching Mrs. Alvarez 2 doors down walk her ancient dachshund in the same loop she walked it every morning, a loop so consistent you could set a clock to it. And for about 10 minutes that was the whole of Mike Ramble's life. Coffee, a dog on a leash, a window with a crack in the corner he kept saying he'd fix. He'd had a life before this one that didn't have 10 quiet minutes anywhere in it. He didn't miss it as much as people probably assumed he should. He spent the afternoon the way he spent most afternoons that didn't involve hauling tourists' luggage at the marina office for cash, which was the closest thing he had to employment these days. A few hours a week unloading boats and hosing down docks for Earl Tucker, paid under the table because Mike's name on a W-2 anywhere tended to start conversations nobody wanted to have. He cleaned the buckle with vinegar and a toothbrush on the back step, watched a little of a ball game with the sound off because the announcers' voices put him to sleep faster than the heat did, and around 4 he showered and put on a clean shirt because showing up at Gus's in a clean shirt was about as close as Calusa K came to a dress code. Gus's Tackle and Tavern sat where the road bent toward the public boat ramp, a low cinder block building with a sign out front shaped like a leaping marlin. The paint on it faded down to the kind of pastel blue that only happens after about 30 Florida summers. 6 trucks filled the gravel lot at 5:30 most evenings, same 6, give or take, Plus, on this particular Tuesday, a rental sedan with Ohio plates, belonging to a couple who'd wandered in 2 nights running because they thought the Marlin sign was charming. It was charming. It was also the only thing in a 5-mile radius that served liquor past 9, which did more for the bar's survival than the Marlin ever managed. Inside it smelled like fryer oil, salt, and the particular mildew and pine sol smell that every bar within 200 yards of saltwater eventually surrendered to. Gus Calloway stood behind the bar in a shirt that had been white sometime during the Clinton administration, running a rag over the same 6 inches of counter he'd been running it over for as long as Mike had known him, which was 3 years, which in Colusa K terms made Gus one of his oldest friends. "You find your galleon yet?" Gus said. "Found a wedding ring. 18 karat. Somebody's having a bad year. Found a belt buckle too. Vietnam era, maybe. Cleaned up nice. Big year for buckles." Gus set a Modelo down without being asked, the bottle sweating already, lime wedged in the neck, because Mike never asked for it that way, and Gus did it anyway, some private joke between them that had outlived whatever made it funny the first time. Mike took his usual stool, the one at the end where the wood had gone pale and smooth from years of forearms, under the ceiling fan that didn't quite reach that far, and left the air heavy in a way he'd stopped minding. He drank the first third of the beer, before he let his shoulders drop the rest of the way down. Down the bar, Dewey Pruitt sat working a scratch-off ticket with a key that didn't belong to any vehicle Mike had ever seen him drive, 3 fingers missing off his left hand, courtesy of a boat winch back in 1994. An injury Dewey had described to Mike in 4 separate versions over 3 years, no 2 of them matching, all of them ending with Dewey as the hero of his own story. 71 years old, and constitutionally incapable of minding his own business. "They ever gonna let you back?" Dewey said, not looking up from the ticket. "CIA. I read they do that sometimes. Bring fellas back when they need 'em." "No. You miss it?" "I miss the dental plan." Dewey laughed like that was the funniest thing he'd heard all week, which in Colusa K it might genuinely have been, and went back to scratching silver dust off a ticket that was never going to pay out more than $2. The Ohio couple sat in a booth by the window, the husband working on a basket of conch fritters with the focused dedication of a man on vacation from a job he hated, the wife taking a photo of the Marlin sign through the window glass for the 2nd night running. Patty Sutton, who waited tables 3 nights a week and tended bar the other 2, dropped a basket of fries in front of Mike without being asked, same as the beer, the kind of service that came from 3 years of watching a man's habits instead of asking about them. "You look like you got some sun today," Patty said. "Tourist made me on the beach. Wanted to talk about a Senate hearing." "They still do that?" "Some of them. Less than they used to." "You ever think about just telling them, 'Yeah, that's me, sign my arm'?" "Every single time." Patty laughed and went to refill the Ohio couple's iced teas, and Mike ate fries and watched the TV mounted in the corner running a muted rerun of a fishing show, a man in a flat-brim hat holding up a tarpon like it had personally wronged him, and for about 20 minutes nothing in the world asked anything of Mike Ramble at all. This was the trade he'd made, somewhere down deep where he didn't examine it too closely. A career, a reputation, a pension, traded for exactly this. A stool. A beer with a lime he hadn't asked for. A town small enough that the worst news on a given evening was whether the red tide had moved north of the inlet yet. He liked it more than he was supposed to admit out loud to anybody, even Gus. His phone buzzed against the bar top, screen lighting up against the dark wood, a Miami area code he didn't have saved in his contacts. He looked at it the way you look at a strange car parked outside your house. Not alarmed exactly, but paying attention. "Bill collector," Gus said, refilling a bowl of peanuts 2 feet down the bar. "Maybe. You want, I'll tell him you died." Tempting. He almost let it ring through to voicemail. There was a version of this evening, the good version, the version that had been playing out the same way 3 or 4 nights a week for 3 years now, where he let the call go, finished the Modelo, walked the half-mile home in the dark with the tree frogs going off in the ditches on either side of the road, and woke up Wednesday morning to do the same 60 yards of sand all over again. The wedding ring already dropped at the bait shop box, already forgotten, already somebody else's grief and not his. Instead, he picked it up on the 4th ring, right before it would have kicked to voicemail. "Ramble," he said. 3 seconds of dead air on the other end. The specific kind of pause that meant a person on the other end was deciding something, weighing whether to speak or hang up and try again in an hour when they'd worked up more nerve. And then a voice came through that Mike hadn't heard in 3 years, a voice that used to mean a windowless room and bad coffee and a problem that wasn't officially his yet but was about to be. "Mike," Jenny Baker said, "don't hang up." He didn't say anything for a second. Down the bar, Dewey scratched at his ticket and swore softly at whatever he found there, and the fishing show host on the muted TV mouthed something triumphant at his tarpon, and Patty laughed at something the Ohio husband said, and none of it touched the small, cold, focused quiet that had opened up in Mike's chest the second he heard that name come out of that voice. "Wasn't going to," he said. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm careful. There's a difference." He turned on the stool, angled himself a few degrees away from Gus, an old reflex, the body doing what the body used to do without asking permission first. 3 years, Jenny. You typically lead with something better than, "Don't hang up." I would have led with hello, but I figured you'd hung up already by the time I got there. You'd have figured right most nights. This isn't most nights. A pause, and underneath it he could hear something, a parking garage maybe, or a stairwell, the particular flat echo of concrete and nobody else around. I need somebody who can disappear into a job and not come back out of it wrong. I thought of you before I thought of anybody else, and I want you to sit with that a second before you tell me no. You're 3 years too late to be flattering me into anything. I'm not flattering you. I'm telling you the truth, which I recall used to work better on you than flattery ever did. Gus had drifted down to refill the peanut bowl in front of Dewey, which put him within 4 feet of Mike's stool, close enough that Mike dropped his voice without making a show of dropping it, the trick being to look like you weren't bothering to lower it at all. "I'm not in that business anymore," Mike said. "You know why I'm not in that business anymore. Whole country knows why I'm not in that business anymore, far as I can tell, given how often strangers want to bring it up to me on the beach. I'm not calling about that business. I run something else now. Private. Small. The kind of work where the client doesn't get a say in who I hire, and I don't get a say in what they're hiding from me, which is usually fine, except this time it isn't. And I need somebody on the ground who can find one specific man before somebody else does." "Why me? Specifically me, Jenny? Out of everybody you've got?" "Because you're already there." "There," he repeated. "Calusa K," she said, and the way she said it told him she'd had the name in her mouth before she ever dialed, that this wasn't a coincidence dressed up as one. "The man I'm looking for crossed into your zip code 2 days ago. Cash withdrawal in Fort Pierce, a motel charge that bounced, then nothing. I don't have anybody else who knows that stretch of coast, and I don't have time to fly somebody in and have them learn it from a map." Mike looked down the bar, at the Marlin sign reflected backward in the window glass, at Patty laughing again, at the Modelo sweating a ring onto the wood in front of him, at the whole small, unbothered evening he'd built for himself, 1 beer and 1 low tide at a time over 3 careful years. "What's it pay?" he said, hating himself a little for asking, hating more that he already knew the answer was going to matter. "Enough that you stop hauling luggage for Earl Tucker for cash." "How do you know about Earl Tucker?" I know things, Mike. It's the only part of the old job I kept. He didn't answer right away. Down the bar, the tarpon on the muted TV finally got released, flopped once, and vanished back into water the color of weak tea, and the host mouthed something that was probably what a fish with his whole chest, and Dewey crumpled his losing scratch off and started in on a new one like the last hour hadn't happened at all. Send me what you've got, Mike said. I'm not saying yes. You're not saying no either. Send me what you've got, Jenny. She was quiet a second, and he could picture her exactly, the way you can picture someone you've watched think 1,000 times, head tilted a degree, weighing whether pushing now cost her more than waiting. She decided to wait. She'd always been good at knowing which one to pick. Tomorrow, she said. Lunch. I'll find someplace that isn't a bar with a fish on the sign. How do you know what the sign looks like? I told you. I know things. And she hung up before he could ask anything else, the line going dead with a small flat click that left him holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than it had 30 seconds ago. Gus had circled back without being asked again, setting a second Modelo down next to the first one that wasn't quite finished yet, lime wedged in the neck the same way as always. Bill collector, Gus said. Mike looked at the new bottle, at the old one, at the Marlin sign hanging crooked over the door the way it had hung crooked for 30 years, and for the first time all evening he didn't have an answer ready that came out easy. Worse, he said. Old boss. They want you back. They want something. Mike picked up the new bottle, turned it once in his hand, didn't drink it yet. Haven't figured out what part of it's mine yet. Chapter 2. Mike woke before the alarm, the way he had most mornings going on 23 years now, body still running on a clock that had never gotten the memo about retirement. He lay there a minute, looking at the crack in the ceiling that ran from the light fixture to the corner like a river on a map. And he thought about the second Modelo Gus had set down without asking, still sitting half-finished in his refrigerator, and about the voice on the phone that had put him on a different footing than the one he'd gone to bed with for 3 years running. He checked his email before he checked anything else, lying flat on his back, phone held above his face like a man praying to a small glowing god. Jenny had sent it at 2:14 in the morning. No subject line. One attachment, a PDF, and a single line of text above it, lunch. Yolanda's, off US 1 past the turnpike exit. Noon. Don't be cute about it. He opened the PDF. Donald R. Hayes, 56 years old. A driver's license photo that made him look like every accountant who'd ever testified before a congressional subcommittee about something nobody outside the room understood. Soft jaw, glasses with frames too thin for his face, the kind of expression that suggested the camera had caught him mid-sentence about depreciation schedules. Last known address in Stewart. Employer listed as Sandpiper Holdings Group, LLC, with a Wilmington, Delaware registration that told Mike everything and nothing at once, the way those Delaware addresses always did. A mail drop standing in for a company that didn't want anybody asking where its money actually lived. Below that, 3 lines that read like they'd been typed fast, by somebody who didn't love putting any of it in writing, even in an email that would self-destruct from a server somewhere in 12 hours. Hayes did the books for SHG. Walked off the job 9 days ago with his work laptop and a banker's box of files. Cash withdrawal Fort Pierce 4 days back. Motel charge bounced 2 days ago. Find him. Get the laptop and files back intact. No police, no paper, no surprises. Mike read it twice, set the phone face down on his chest, and looked at the ceiling crack a while longer. No surprises was doing a lot of work in 3 words. He drove the truck out to Tucker's Marina, a little after 8, the morning still soft and gray at the edges before the heat fully committed to the day, and found Earl Tucker exactly where Earl Tucker always was, standing on the finger pier in front of slip 9 with a coffee can full of stove bolts in one hand, and an expression on his face that suggested the bolts had personally disappointed him. "These don't match," Earl said by way of greeting, holding the can out like Mike was supposed to diagnose it from 6 feet away. "I sent Cody to the hardware store for 3/8, and he came back with a can of God knows." "Cody's 19, Earl. Be glad he came back with anything. I'd settle for the right bolts." Earl Tucker was 73, and built like a fence post that had weathered well, sun-cured the color of a saddle, with forearms that still did real work, and a voice that had been worn down to gravel by 60 years of yelling over outboard motors. He set the can down on a piling, and squinted at Mike the way he squinted at incoming weather. "You look like a man who didn't sleep good." "Phone call kept me up." "Bad news?" "Don't know yet. Might be work." "Work's good. Last I checked, you were hauling igloo coolers down the dock for tip money, which is a hell of a thing for a man with your resume." "My resume's the reason I'm hauling coolers, Earl." Tucker grunted at that, which was as close as Tucker came to laughing about anything before 9 in the morning, and waved Mike toward the office trailer at the head of the dock, a low-slung double-wide that had been white sometime during the Carter administration and had since settled into a color best described as marina. Inside, a window unit fought a losing battle against the morning heat, and a corkboard held faded photos of fish that had been caught off that dock going back decades, curling at the corners, thumbtacked 3 deep. "Got the whaler needs her bottom scraped before the pelletiers come back Thursday," Earl said, digging 2 20s and a 10 out of a coffee can that lived on the desk for exactly this purpose. "And if you got an hour after, I got a leak in the fuel dock line I can't find with both eyes and a flashlight." "I got an hour." "You got a meeting at noon, sounded like." "How'd you?" "You said might be work like a man's got somewhere to be at a specific time. Wasn't hard math." Earl handed over the cash, folded it himself instead of letting Mike take it loose, an old habit from a man who'd handled money his whole life and never trusted anybody, including himself, to count it casually. "This about the CIA business?" "No. Didn't think so. Don't see how it could be, this far from Washington." Earl picked the coffee can of bolts back up, turning it over like the contents might have sorted themselves out while nobody was looking. "Whatever it is, you watch yourself. Town's quiet. I like it quiet." "I like it quiet too, Earl." "Don't sound real convinced of that this morning." Mike didn't answer, because there wasn't a good answer, and went to find the whaler. Yolanda's sat in a strip plaza off US 1 between a check cashing place and a vape shop that had gone out of business twice and reopened under 2 different names, the kind of plaza that existed in some version on every 4-lane highway on the Treasure Coast, anchored by whichever business could survive the rent. The diner itself had been there longer than the plaza had a right to expect, judging by the laminate counter worn through to the particle board in 3 places, and a window unit blasting cold air directly onto booth 4, hard enough to flutter the paper placemats. The smell hit you before the door finished swinging shut behind you. Pork roasting somewhere in back, garlic and sour orange, and underneath it the dark, almost burnt smell of Cuban coffee running through an espresso machine older than most of the staff. A radio behind the counter played something with a horn section and a clave rhythm at a volume calibrated for the owner's hearing and nobody else's. Jenny Baker sat in the back booth, the one with the clearest sightline to both the front door and the kitchen pass-through, which told Mike she hadn't lost a single habit in 3 years, even if she'd traded the windowless rooms for a job that let her pick her own restaurants. She'd changed less than he expected, and more than he wanted to admit. Dark hair pulled back, simple gold studs, a blazer that had no business looking that crisp in this heat, sleeves pushed to the elbow because even Jenny Baker eventually surrendered something to Florida in July. She had a small white cup of cortadito in front of her, 2/3 gone, and a leather folio closed on the table like a held breath. "You look older," she said by way of hello. "You look like you found a tailor who lies to you about the heat." Linen lies to everybody about the heat. That's the whole point of linen. She nodded at the bench across from her. "Sit. You're making the waitress nervous standing there." He sat. A waitress in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair appeared without being summoned, the way good diner waitresses always did, and Mike ordered a medianoche and a cortado without thinking about it, the way you order in a place that smells right even if you've never set foot in it before. "You drove all the way out here," he said once the waitress had gone. "Could have sent the file and a phone number." "I could have." Jenny turned her cup a quarter turn on its saucer, a small, precise motion, the kind of thing a person does with their hands when their face has already been told to hold still. "I wanted to look at you while we talked about it. See if 3 years left you good for this, or just good for hauling coolers." "Earl told you about the coolers?" "Earl didn't tell me anything. I do my homework, Mike, same as I always did. You think I called a man cold without knowing what his last 3 years looked like? That's supposed to flatter me or scare me? Bit of both, I'd imagine. Most things I do, that's the design." The waitress came back with his cortado and a small glass of water sweating onto a paper coaster, and Jenny waited until she'd gone again before she opened the folio, sliding a single sheet across the table face down, the kind of move that belonged in a much darker room than a diner with a horn section playing on the radio. "Don Hayes," she said. "Bookkeeper. Worked 11 years for a development outfit called Sandpiper Holdings, mostly out of an office in Stewart, though the company itself is paper out of Delaware, the way they all are anymore. Quiet man. Divorced, no kids, plays in a bowling league on Thursdays that he hasn't shown up to in 2 weeks." She tapped the folded sheet without turning it over yet, a habit, like she enjoyed the moment before the reveal more than the reveal itself. 9 days ago, he walked out of that office at lunchtime, never came back, and took his work laptop and a banker's box of files with him. "Files on what?" "Don't know exactly. Don't need to know exactly. My client needs them back, intact, before anybody else gets a look at what's in that box." "Who's your client?" "Doesn't matter." "It matters to me." "I understand it does." She said it without apology, the kind of flat statement that closed a door politely instead of slamming it. "It's not something I can give you, Mike. Confidentiality isn't a courtesy in this business, it's the entire product. You know that better than most people alive." Mike turned the cortado cup a half-turn the way she'd been turning hers, not quite mocking her, more like the habit was contagious. "Last time I worked for somebody who wouldn't tell me who I was actually working for. I ended up in front of a Senate committee explaining myself to people who'd already decided what the answer was. This isn't that. You don't know it's not that. You don't know what it is. You just know what you're being paid to find. That's the job, Mike. That's always been the job, yours and mine both, going back 20 years before either of us ever sat in this booth." Something in her voice tightened, just slightly, not anger exactly, more like a woman tired of explaining gravity to somebody who kept asking why things fell down. "I'm not asking you to break into the Pentagon. I'm asking you to find a sad, scared bookkeeper who's probably hiding in a motel room, eating gas station sandwiches, and bring back a box of paperwork that belongs to the company that employed him for 11 years. That's the whole job." "Then why's it pay enough to stop me hauling coolers?" "Because urgency costs money, and my client wants this resolved before the box gets anywhere it shouldn't be." She finally turned the sheet over, revealing a number written by hand, no letterhead, no invoice, the kind of figure that made Mike sit a half-inch straighter without intending to. "Half now, half on delivery. Cash. No contract, no W-9, no paper trail back to either one of us." The medianoche arrived, cut diagonal, steam coming off it, the bread pressed thin and crackling at the edges, and Mike didn't touch it right away. "No cops," he said. "No cops. And if I find him, and he doesn't want to hand over the box, then you persuade him. Gently. I'm not paying you to be the man you used to be on the clock, Mike. I'm paying you to be smarter than that man. He was good at finding things. He was never as good at the part that came after. That landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to land. A small flick of a blade she probably hadn't even meant as a blade. Just an old colleague's shorthand for an old colleague's flaws. And Mike let it sit there a second without picking it up. "You sending anybody else after this?" he said. "Or is it just me?" Jenny didn't answer right away, and the half-second of nothing told him more than whatever she said next was going to. "You're the closest," she said. "Geographically. That's why I called you first." "First. Not only." "I didn't say only." "No," Mike said. "You didn't." He picked up half the sandwich, bit into it, let the silence run a minute while the radio behind the counter slid from one horn-heavy song into another almost identical one, and the window unit air conditioner over booth 4 kept up its losing fight against the day outside. "Half now," he said finally. "Half on delivery. And I want 48 hours before you decide to send somebody else this way to clean up after me if I'm slow." "You won't be slow. You don't know that." "I know you," Jenny said, and there was something almost gentle in it. The first thing she'd said all lunch that didn't sound rehearsed in a car on the way over. 3 years off the clock doesn't undo 20 years on it. You'll find him in 4 days, maybe 5. You'll feel guilty about taking the money the whole time, and you'll take it anyway, because Earl Tucker doesn't pay enough for a man with your skill set to keep scraping barnacles off rich people's boats for tip change. That what you tell yourself, hiring guys like me? That you're doing us a favor? I tell myself I'm hiring the best available person for a job that needs doing quietly. What you tell yourself about it is your business, not mine." She reached into the folio again and slid an envelope across the table, thick enough that Mike didn't need to count it to know it was real, the kind of weight that cash has that no other paper quite matches. He didn't open it at the table. He'd learned that much a long time ago, in rooms with worse lighting than this one. You don't count money in front of the person who handed it to you, not because you don't trust them, but because counting it makes the moment about the money instead of the work. And the work was always the part that mattered right up until it wasn't. "Fort Pierce," she said. "That's the last hit on the card. Motel called the Sandcastle off Route 1. The kind of place that takes cash and doesn't ask follow-up questions. Manager's name is on the second page if you need a reason to knock on doors. You want me to start there. I want you to start wherever you want to start. You're the one who used to find people for a living. I'm just the one writing the check this time." Mike folded the envelope once and put it inside his jacket against his ribs, where he'd carried money like this 100 times before in 100 rooms that smelled like nothing this good. He finished the rest of the sandwich without saying much, and Jenny finished her cortadito, and for a few minutes they sat there like two people who'd known each other a long time and didn't need every silence filled, which was true as far as it went, and also not the whole truth, because there was a version of this lunch where she told him who Sandpiper Holdings actually answered to, and this wasn't that version, and both of them knew it. "One more thing," she said as the check came, and she reached for it before he could. An old habit neither of them had bothered to argue about in years. "If Hayes panics and runs, don't chase him through anybody else's business. No scenes. Whatever this town thinks it knows about you, you don't need to give it anything new to talk about. You worried about my reputation now. I'm worried about my client's name staying out of any local paper that still bothers covering this stretch of coast." She set cash down on the check without waiting for change, stood, smoothed the front of the blazer that lied so well about the heat. 48 hours, Mike. Call me when you've got eyes on him, not after you've already got the box. I want to know before, not after. Why before? Because before, I can still help you if something goes sideways. After, all I can do is clean it up. She said it lightly, like a piece of friendly advice instead of what it actually was, which was a warning dressed up in a blazer that had no business looking that crisp in 91 degrees. Good to see you, Mike. You look good. Tired, but good. She left, before he could find a way to ask the question sitting under his tongue since the moment she'd said before, not after, what exactly she expected might go sideways, and why she already had a plan ready for when it did. He watched her cross the parking lot through the window, past the check-cashing place, past the vape shop that had failed and risen twice, to a black sedan that looked rented from across the lot and probably was, the kind of car that left no fingerprint anywhere it parked. She didn't look back at the diner once. She'd never been a looker back, not in the old days and apparently not now either. The waitress came by to clear the plates, glanced at the envelope-shaped bulge inside his jacket with the kind of practiced blindness that diner waitresses cultivated their whole working lives, and topped off his water without being asked. "Friend of yours?" she said, nodding toward the lot. "Old colleague. She tip good. She tips fine. Pays better." The waitress laughed at that like it was the funniest thing she'd heard since the lunch rush started, and went back to the counter, and Mike sat alone in the back booth a minute longer with a cooling glass of water and an envelope of cash he hadn't counted yet, doing the kind of math he used to do for a living, not about money, about angles, about what a woman who never wasted a single sentence had managed to not say in nearly 40 minutes of conversation. He should have asked who Sandpiper Holdings actually was. He should have asked it twice, the way he used to ask things twice in rooms where the first answer was always a test to see if you'd settle for it. He didn't ask it a second time. He paid for the meal himself, since Jenny had only covered her own end of it, left a tip too big for a man living on cooler hauling money, and walked out into the heat already running the route to Fort Pierce in his head, US 1 North, past the Tractor Supply, past the church with the marquee that changed its joke every week, to a motel called the Sandcastle where a sad, scared bookkeeper was eating gas station sandwiches and waiting without knowing it yet for somebody to come find him. Chapter 3. The Sandcastle Motel sat on a stretch of US 1 that had given up trying to look like anything but what it was, a single-story horseshoe of rooms around a parking lot, paint the color of a Band-Aid gone wrong, a pool out front fenced in chain link with a hand-lettered sign reading, "No lifeguard on duty, swim at own risk," the misspelling apparently permanent enough that somebody had laminated it. A plastic castle turret rose up over the office door, faded pink, missing one crenellation, like a chess piece somebody's dog had gotten to. Mike parked the truck, nose out old habit, and went in past a vending machine that hummed louder than it should have and smelled faintly of the orange soda it hadn't dispensed correctly in years. The man behind the desk was somewhere north of 60, wearing a Guayabera shirt unbuttoned one notch too far for a man his age, a gold chain doing the work of suggesting he'd once had better days in a better decade. A small television behind the counter played a Spanish-language game show with the volume low enough that it was really just colored light moving. "Help you," the man said. Not a question, exactly. More like a transaction he was opening. "Looking for a guest. Don Hayes. Might have checked in 9-10 days back. You police?" "No." "Bail bonds?" "No." The man's eyes went from Mike's face to Mike's shoes and back up. The universal motel clerk appraisal. The one that decided in about a second and a half whether a stranger was worth the trouble of lying to. "Name don't ring nothing," the man said, which Mike didn't believe for a second, the way he didn't believe the weather forecast on a day the sky already looked wrong. Mike set 2 20s on the counter, not sliding them, just setting them down flat, The way you'd set down a hand of cards you weren't bluffing with. Soft-spoken fella, Mike said. Glasses too thin for his face. Paid cash, probably nervous about it, probably watched the door more than a man on vacation usually does. The clerk looked at the 20s a second, then up at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles above them both, like the answer might be written up there if he gave it long enough. Room 11, he said. 6 nights. Card declined on night 7, paid cash for 2 more, then gone. Left the key in the room, which nobody does. Most of 'em. I gotta send somebody banging on the door at checkout. He say where he was headed. Didn't say nothing to me. Quiet fella. Didn't want the maid in there. Kept the do not disturb sign on the whole stay, which made my cleaning girl happy 'cause that's one less room, and made me wonder what he didn't want her seeing. The clerk took the 20s, folded them into a shirt pocket that already had a pen leaking faintly into the fabric. Left something behind, matter of fact. Was gonna throw it out. He came back from a back room with a gas station bag, handle knotted twice, the kind of care a man takes with something he doesn't fully trust himself not to lose. Inside, a phone charger, a half-eaten roll of antacids, and a folded Sandpiper Holdings Group expense report, 3 months stale, a column of numbers that meant nothing to Mike at a glance, except that somebody had circled one line in pen hard enough to nearly tear the paper. Tucker Marina parcel, appraisal adj. Mike held the page a second longer than he needed to. He get any visitors? Anybody come around asking after him, before or after he left? One fella. 2 days before he checked out for good. Didn't come to the desk, just sat out there. The clerk nodded toward the parking lot through the window, toward a spot by the ice machine that had a clean sight line to room 11's door. Gray sedan. Rental plate, I think, them stickers they put on. Sat there maybe 20 minutes, didn't get out, drove off. I only noticed on account of the ice machine's been broke a month, and I figured he was there to complain about it. He alone. Just him I saw. Don't mean nobody else was in the car. Mike thanked him, left the gas station bag's contents in his own jacket pocket, and stood a minute by the broken ice machine looking at the door of room 11, painted the same Band-Aid pink as everything else, a peephole gone dark with age. Somewhere behind him, the Spanish game show host made an announcement that excited a studio audience considerably more than anything happening in this parking lot. A gray sedan, sitting where it could watch a frightened man's door without anybody noticing it was watching. That wasn't curiosity. That was somebody running the same kind of math Mike used to run for a living. Hayes's apartment turned out to be a 2-story stucco building in Stewart called the Banyan Court, which didn't have a banyan tree anywhere on the property, as far as Mike could see, just a parking lot striped in fading yellow, and a row of mailboxes set into a brick pillar near the entrance, half of them hanging open like mouths. The landlord lived in Unit 1, ground floor, a woman named Connie Whitfield, who answered the door in a housecoat at 2 in the afternoon with a cigarette already going, and a small dog under one arm that yapped exactly twice before losing interest entirely. "You're not the first one asking," she said, before Mike had gotten 3 words out. "Who else came around?" "Fella from the management company, week back, wanting to know, did Hayes leave a forwarding address on account of his rent being 2 weeks late." She took a drag, exhaled it up and away from Mike with what might have been manners or might have just been habit. Then a fella, who didn't say who he was at all. Just asked the same thing, different words. I told him, same as I'm telling you. Don't know, don't care, owes me 400 and change, and if he don't surface in another week, I'm cutting that lock and selling whatever he left behind to cover it. This second fella. What did he look like? Clean. That's the word I'd use. Clean shirt, clean shoes. The kind of clean where you figure he irons his undershirts. Connie took another pull off the cigarette, looked at Mike with the flat appraisal of a woman who'd spent 40 years deciding which strangers were worth a full conversation. Talked nice. Real nice. Made me feel bad for not having more to tell him, which now that I think on it is a strange thing for a stranger to make you feel. He leave a card? A name? Nope. Just thanked me and left, polite as church. She looked past Mike toward the stairs, toward a second-floor door with a faded 12 screwed in at a slight tilt. You want up there? I'll let you up there. Save me the trouble of doing it myself when I finally cut that lock. But you find anything worth money, that's mine first, on account of what he owes. The apartment smelled like a place that had been sealed up for over a week in Florida heat. Stale, a little sour. The particular smell of an air conditioner that had been switched off mid-July. Hayes had left, in the kind of hurry that doesn't bother folding clothes back into drawers. A coffee mug sat in the sink, with 2 weeks of green growing in the bottom of it. The mail on the kitchen counter had been sorted once, a long time ago, into bills and not bills, and then abandoned mid-sort, like something had interrupted him before he'd finished a task he did every single day of his life. Mike went through it, standing up, hands moving fast and light, the old discipline coming back without him calling for it. Bank statement opened, balance low enough to explain the late rent. A folded brochure for a fishing charter out of Tucker's Marina, half-price coupons stapled to the corner, the kind of thing that comes free in a tackle shop and gets shoved in a junk drawer. A torn corner of a legal pad with 3 words in cramped handwriting, Earl won't sign. Mike stood there with that scrap of paper a long moment, the window unit silent and dead behind him, sweat starting at his collar in the stale heat. He'd been hauling coolers and scraping barnacles for cash at Tucker's Marina for going on a year now. He knew Earl Tucker's coffee can full of stove bolts, and Earl Tucker's opinion on the proper gauge of fishing line, and Earl Tucker's general disdain for every regulation the county had passed since 1986. He had never once, in all that time, thought to wonder whether the marina itself was a target, whether somebody, somewhere, wanted that crooked little dock badly enough to build a Delaware shell company and hire a quiet bookkeeper and then come looking, clean-shirted and polite when that bookkeeper got cold feet. He pocketed the scrap of paper. Find anything? Connie called up from the bottom of the stairs, not climbing them herself, a woman who'd learned a long time ago which flights of stairs were worth her knees. Nothing that's worth $400, Mike said, which was true enough, and left it at that. The marina at 4 in the afternoon ran at its own particular tempo, charter boats easing back in with their catch, a couple of college kids hosing salt off a center console 2 slips down, Earl Tucker's radio playing AM talk at a volume that suggested he liked it as much for the noise as the content. Mike found him in the office trailer, going through invoices with a pair of reading glasses pushed down his nose, a cup of coffee gone cold beside him that he'd clearly forgotten about an hour ago. Bottom scraped, Mike said. Fuel line's a slower job than I figured. Found the leak, but the fitting's stripped, gonna need a part. Course it does. Earl didn't look up from the invoices. Everything on this dock needs a part nobody's made since Carter was president. Mike leaned in the doorway a second, watching the old man work through a stack of paper that looked thicker than usual, more of it than the marina's modest business should generate on a Tuesday. A lot of paperwork for a bait shop and a fuel dock, Mike said. You'd think. Earl set the reading glasses up on his forehead, rubbed at the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, and for the first time since Mike had known him, looked tired in a way that wasn't about the heat or the hour. County's been at me again. New round of inspection notices, fire code, dock weight ratings, stuff that's been fine for 40 years suddenly ain't fine no more. And I got a letter, week and a half back, from some outfit out of Stewart wanting to talk about my, quote, real estate position. He said the last 2 words like they tasted bad in his mouth. My real estate position. Like I'm sitting on a golf course instead of a dock my granddaddy built with his own hands in 1951. Mike kept his voice level, The way you keep your hand level pouring something you don't want to spill. They make you an offer? Made me a number. Earl reached into a drawer, pulled out a single sheet, slid it across the desk without much ceremony, like the number itself had stopped surprising him after the third or fourth time he'd looked at it. Generous, they keep saying. Generous, like that's a compliment instead of a word a fella uses right before he takes something off you. Sandpiper Holdings Group, LLC. A Stewart address that Mike would have bet money was a forwarding suite in an office park, not an actual building with actual people in it. A figure that was, in fact, generous. The kind of number that would make a tired 73-year-old man think hard about his knees and his back, and the fact that nobody in his family under 40 wanted any part of running a marina anymore. 3 generations, Earl said, like he was answering a question Mike hadn't asked yet. My granddaddy, then my daddy, then me. My boy's in Tampa selling boats he don't have to scrape barnacles off of, which I don't blame him for, not one bit. But it means there's nobody coming after me to take this dock when I'm done with it, except maybe Cody. And Cody can't tell 3/8 bolts from a can of God knows, so. He shrugged, a motion that traveled all the way down through his shoulders like it cost him something. Generous number starts looking like a mercy some nights. You gonna sign it? Ain't signed nothing yet. Earl took the page back, folded it once, put it back in the drawer like a man putting away a problem he wasn't ready to look at again today. Told him I needed time to think. They said take your time, real polite about it, which made me feel worse than if they'd pushed. Mike thought about the scrap of paper in his pocket. Earl won't sign, written in a frightened bookkeeper's cramped hand, and the gray sedan sitting by an ice machine watching a motel door, and a clean-shirted man asking a landlord polite questions about a man who'd taken a box of files and run. This outfit, Mike said. Sandpiper. They got a face. Somebody you've actually sat across a table from. Fella named Roger Hammond does the talking. Gladhander. Shows up to the chamber breakfast, shakes everybody's hand twice, talks about revitalizing the waterfront like the waterfront's been sitting around complaining about its situation. Earl picked the reading glasses back up, settled them on his nose, went back to the invoices like the conversation had already cost him more attention than he had to spare. Why you asking all this? Thought you were here about a fuel line fitting. Mike held that a second. There were a dozen versions of the next sentence, and most of them ended with Earl Tucker finding out things Mike wasn't paid to tell him yet. Things that belonged to Jenny Baker's envelope of cash and not to a friendship built on coffee cans and stove bolts. Heard the name around, Mike said, which wasn't a lie so much as it was most of the truth, wearing a smaller coat. Didn't know it had gotten as far as your dock. Gotten as far as my dock. My cousin's boat slip up in Sewell's Point. Half the working waterfront from here to the inlet way I hear it. Earl didn't look up again. You hear anything else about him worth knowing, you tell me. I got a feeling this ain't the last letter I'm getting. I will, Mike said, and meant it. And also knew, standing there in the doorway with a frightened man's torn handwriting folded against his ribs, that he was already a step further into Sandpiper Holdings' business than Earl Tucker had any idea, and that the part of the job Jenny Baker was paying him for, and the part of his life that lived on this dock, had just quietly become the same job, whether either one of them had agreed to that or not. Outside, the college kids finished hosing down the center console, and one of them dropped the nozzle, and it clattered against the dock boards loud enough that 3 pelicans on the next piling over took off at once, wings working hard against air that hadn't cooled off 1 degree since noon. Colusa K Police Department occupied half a strip building it shared with a tax preparer and a defunct travel agency that nobody had bothered to take the sign down for, the whole row backed up against a drainage canal that smelled like turtles and gasoline in roughly equal measure. The department itself ran 4 uniforms, 2 detectives, a chief who'd been elected twice running unopposed, and a budget that showed in the lobby furniture, plastic chairs bolted to a rail, a water fountain with a handwritten out-of-order sign that had gone yellow with age, a bulletin board where the most wanted flyers had faded in the window light until the suspects looked more like ghosts than criminals. Mike came in a little after 9, showered, in a clean shirt, because he'd learned a long time ago that showing up clean to ask a favor of a cop bought you about 30 seconds of goodwill you didn't get any other way. The desk officer was maybe 26, built like he still played intramural softball, with a haircut that hadn't quite settled out of the academy yet. He looked up from a crossword, looked at Mike, and did the thing Mike had watched 100 strangers do over 3 years, the squint, the half-second of recalculating, the involuntary widening of the eyes. Hang on. The kid set the pen down careful, like it might startle something. You're the guy. From the hearings. People keep telling me that. My uncle watched the whole thing. All of it, like it was the Super Bowl. The kid said it with a kind of awe that didn't fully track as an insult or a compliment, just raw enthusiasm for having a famous face in his lobby on a Wednesday morning. What can I do for you? Looking for Detective Jennings. She around? She's around. You got a case or you just, he gestured vaguely, a motion that seemed to mean want to talk shop with a real federal type, which Mike had also gotten before, mostly from men who watch too much basic cable. Got a question for her. Won't take long. The kid picked up a phone older than he was, mumbled something into it, and a minute later, a door at the back of the lobby opened, and Carol Jennings came through it wiping her hands on a paper towel like she'd interrupted something involving either lunch or evidence, and from the smell drifting out behind her, burnt coffee and something microwaved past its limits, Mike guessed lunch. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, hair pulled back hard enough to look like it hurt, a blazer that had clearly been bought for a body she'd had 10 years and 1 kid ago and never gotten around to replacing. She had the particular tired economy of motion that came from doing a 2 detective departments worth of work with 1 detective's worth of hours in the day. Ramble, she said, like a fact she was confirming rather than a greeting. Heard you were in town. Took you 3 years to come say hello. Didn't figure I had a reason to. You don't now either, far as I can tell, but here you are. She nodded toward the back, the gesture of someone who'd rather not have this conversation in front of a rookie still riding the high of recognizing a minor cable news face. Come on back. I got 4 minutes and a sandwich I'd like to finish sometime today. Her office was a desk wedged into a corner of a bullpen that held 1 other desk, currently empty, a corkboard with case photos turned face down on purpose, and a coffee mug that read World's Okayest Detective in faded letters, a gift from somebody with a sense of humor that hadn't aged well against the actual job. A photo of a boy, maybe 10, holding up a snook nearly as long as he was tall, sat propped against her monitor. Sit, she said, not unkindly, dropping into her own chair with the controlled collapse of a woman whose knees had opinions about standing all morning. I read your file, you know. Whole thing. The minute your name crossed a report in this county, I pulled what I could find. Most of it's classified. Most of what's classified got summarized pretty thoroughly by 60 senators with C-SPAN cameras pointed at them, Mr. Ramble. I didn't need a clearance. I needed a working cable package. She unwrapped half a sandwich that had clearly been wrapped that morning and was already showing it, lettuce gone soft at the edge. You came in front of that committee, looking like a man who already knew which way the vote was going before the gavel came down. I respect that more than I respect most of what I watched on that channel that month. Mike didn't have a ready answer for that, which didn't happen to him often, and he covered the gap by glancing at the boy in the photo instead. Your son. Cody Jr. Don't ask, his daddy's idea, not mine. She took a bite, chewed, watched Mike over it with the patient, assessing look of a woman who'd interviewed enough liars to have stopped being impressed by anybody's poker face, including the good ones. You didn't come down here to ask after my kid's fishing trip, though. What do you need? Don Hayes, bookkeeper, lived over at the Banyan Court in Stewart, worked for an outfit called Sandpiper Holdings. He walked off the job 9-10 days back with some company files. Anybody file anything on him? Missing persons, welfare check, anything at all? Jennings set the sandwich down, wiped her fingers on the paper towel, and the shift in her posture was small but real, the kind of recalibration a good detective does without making a show of it. Nothing's been filed. Not here, not that I've seen cross my desk from Stewart PD or the sheriff, and believe me, those two offices talk to each other plenty when it's slow. She tilted her head a degree. Why's a private citizen who scrapes barnacles for cash money looking for a missing bookkeeper nobody's bothered to report missing? Working a job. For who? Can't say. Course you can't. She didn't push it, which surprised him a little. Just filed the non-answer away the way she'd clearly filed 100 other non-answers over a career, and picked the sandwich back up. Officially, Mr. Hayes is a grown man, no court order, no restraining order, no custody dispute, no medical condition on file that I can find that'd make him a danger to himself. A grown man's allowed to walk off a job, and not tell his landlord where he's headed. Happens about 4 times a week in this county alone. Mostly fellas running from child support or a bookie or a wife, sometimes all 3 at once. You don't think this is that? I didn't say that. She wiped her fingers again, slower this time, thinking it through out loud in the careful, half-reluctant way of a cop who'd rather not be curious about something she had no jurisdiction to chase. Sandpiper Holdings has come up twice in the last 6 months. Once was a noise complaint that turned into a property line dispute out near the inlet. Nothing, civil matter, kicked it to the county. Other time was a fella came in here wanting to file harassment charges against a code enforcement officer he said kept showing up at his restaurant for inspections that didn't make sense. 3-4 times in 2 months, found something new wrong every time. Guy swore up and down the inspector was working an angle for somebody trying to buy his lease out from under him. What happened with that? Nothing happened with that, because code enforcement doing inspections isn't a crime, even if the timing stinks, and the restaurant guy couldn't point to a single thing that crossed a legal line. I told him, same as I'm telling you. Doesn't mean something's not going on. Means it's not a police matter yet. She let that sit a second, the yet doing more work than the rest of the sentence. You think Hayes ran because of something he found in those books? I think a frightened man took a banker's box of files and a laptop and disappeared into a $40 motel room and paid cash so nobody could trace him. And I think somebody in a rental sedan sat outside that motel watching his door 2 days before he checked out for good. That's what I think. I don't have proof of a single piece of it. Jennings considered that, looking past him for a second at nothing in particular, the corkboard maybe, or the window with its blinds half down against the morning sun. You got a plate on that sedan. Partial. Rental sticker, no full number. Partial doesn't get me anywhere official. I run a partial through the system with no case number attached. My chief asks why, and I don't have an answer he likes, on account of you not telling me who's paying you. She said it without heat, just laying out the architecture of the problem the way you'd point out a load-bearing wall before somebody took a sledgehammer to it. I can ask around, unofficial. See if anybody clocked a gray rental sitting somewhere they shouldn't have been sitting. That's a favor, not a service. You understand the difference? I understand it. Good. Means you'll actually owe me one, instead of acting surprised when I collect. She balled up the sandwich wrapper, missed the trash can by a foot, didn't get up to fix it, the universal gesture of someone who'd pick it up on her way out and not before. Sandpiper Holdings. You know who's behind the paper? Delaware Shell. No name attached I can find yet. Funny thing about Delaware Shells, Jennings said. Nobody builds one to hide a marina deal worth what Earl Tucker's dock is worth. You build one of those to hide something worth a hell of a lot more than a marina. And the marina's just the part that happens to be sitting on top of it where everybody can see. She looked at him a beat longer than was comfortable, the look of a woman deciding how much rope to hand a man she'd only just met in person, file or no file. You were CIA 20 years. You ever get the sense, working those rooms, that the small thing in front of you was never the actual thing? More times than I'd like to count. There you go, then. She stood, which meant the 4 minutes were up, conversation over whether either of them was finished with it or not. An efficiency Mike recognized from his own old life and respected even as it annoyed him. I'll make some calls. Unofficial. You find anything that crosses a real line. Somebody gets hurt, somebody goes missing for real. Somebody puts a hand on you that they shouldn't. You call me before you call anybody else. Not after. I get enough cleanup work in this job without doing it for free on top of it. Funny, Mike said. Somebody else told me the same thing yesterday. Before, not after. Smart somebody, Jennings said, already moving past him toward the door, toward whatever was actually on her desk that mattered more than 4 minutes with a man whose face used to be on the news. Means they know how this usually goes. Chapter 4. The heat outside had built into something with weight to it by the time Mike crossed the lobby. The kind of midday Florida sun that made the asphalt in the parking lot look like it was sweating, along with everybody standing on it. The rookie at the desk gave him a little wave on the way out. The wave of a kid who'd be telling this story at Thanksgiving for the next decade. The time the spy guy came into the station, growing taller in the telling each year, the way every good story did in a town this size. Mike's truck sat where he'd left it, third spot from the door, and he had his hand on the door handle, keys already half out of his pocket, when something made him stop the way something used to make him stop 100 times a week in another life. Not a sound exactly, not a sight exactly, just a wrongness in the corner of his vision that his brain flagged faster than his eyes had finished processing it. A gray sedan sat 2 rows back, nose out, parked in the shade of the one scrawny live oak the strip mall's parking lot had to offer, rental sticker faint but visible on the rear bumper in the afternoon light. Empty. Nobody behind the wheel. But empty didn't mean nothing. Not in a lot this small. Not parked exactly where a man could watch a police department's front door without looking like he was watching anything at all. Mike didn't go toward it. Didn't look at it directly either. Just let his eyes pass over it the way eyes pass over everything in a parking lot you're not actually interested in, and got into his own truck, and pulled out of the spot, heading the opposite direction from where the sedan was nosed, watching the rear view the whole way to the light. It didn't move. Might have meant nothing. Might have meant the world. He sat at the red light a beat too long enough that the truck behind him gave a short, irritated honk. And in his mirror, just as the light went green and he eased through the intersection, the gray sedan's headlights came on. Headlights didn't mean anything by themselves. Half the cars on US 1 ran their lights at dusk, whether they needed to or not, some new state law nobody enforced, mostly ignored. But these came on a half second after Mike's truck cleared the intersection, not before, and a half second was the kind of detail that used to get filed away automatically. Back when filing things away automatically was a paid skill instead of a tick he couldn't shake. He didn't speed up. Speeding up told a tale you'd clocked him, and clocked tales got cautious, and cautious tales got harder to read. He held 40 in a 45 zone, hit his blinker early for the turn into the Publix plaza, swung wide and slow like a man thinking about milk, and watched the mirror the whole way through it. The sedan didn't follow him into the lot. Sat at the light instead, 2 cars back, going nowhere. And when the light changed, it rolled straight through, north, away from the plaza, away from Mike entirely, like it had never had any interest in him at all. Could have been nothing. Could have been somebody good enough to peel off, rather than commit to a tale that had already gone stale. Mike sat in the Publix lot a full 3 minutes with the engine running, working through both possibilities, and came out the other side no more sure than when he went in. He bought a gallon of milk he didn't need yet, and a rotisserie chicken he did, and drove home a different way than usual, the long way, past the cemetery and the volunteer fire station, just to see if anything stuck to him on the trip. Nothing did. That bothered him more than if something had. The Colusa K Branch Library shared a parking lot with the county health department and had exactly 4 public computers, 2 of which had a sign taped to the monitor reading "Printer, out of paper, ask at desk," the handwriting suggesting the sign had been there since at least 1 printer cartridge ago. Mike took the 3rd terminal, the one facing the window instead of the room, an old habit nobody in this building was ever going to understand the reason for. He pulled up the Florida Division of Corporations site first, because it was free and it was public, and it didn't ask why you wanted to know. Sandpiper Holdings Group, LLC. Filed 18 months back. Registered agent listed as a firm in Wilmington, Delaware. The same outfit that handled 1,000 other companies who needed an address without needing a face behind it. Manager field blank. Authorized member field blank. The kind of filing built by somebody who'd done this before and knew exactly which boxes the state of Florida didn't require you to fill in. He searched the registered agent's address next, the actual street number in Wilmington, on a hunch, and the hunch paid out. 3 more LLCs popped using that same agent, same suite number, filed within 4 months of each other. Tradewind Acquisitions. K Vista Partners. Blue Water Development Group. None of them famous, none of them with a website, none of them with anything beyond a filing date and a blank manager field. 4 shells standing in a row wearing 4 different coats, all of them tailored by the same hand. A woman at the next terminal over leaned across without asking permission, the way people in small libraries do, like the building itself waived the usual rules about minding your business. "You're researching companies," she said. Not a question. A woman, maybe 60, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a tote bag with a paperback spine sticking out of it that Mike couldn't read from the angle. "I do that too. My husband thinks I'm playing solitaire. Just looking something up. That's what I tell him too." She went back to her own screen, satisfied apparently with having confirmed they were engaged in the same harmless conspiracy, and Mike went back to his. He pulled the county property appraiser's site next and started cross-referencing addresses, every parcel along the inlet side of the waterfront that had changed hands in the last 18 months matched against the buyer names on the deeds. Tradewind Acquisitions had bought the old bait shop on Indian River Drive. K Vista Partners had bought 2 lots that used to be a boat trailer storage yard. Blue Water Development had picked up a defunct seafood wholesaler's warehouse for a number that looked, on its face, like somebody had been desperate to sell, and somebody else had been in no hurry to negotiate. 4 companies. 1 agent. 1 footprint, growing parcel by parcel along a half-mile of waterfront that happened to end, if you kept walking north past the old wholesaler's lot, right at the chain-link fence around Tucker's Marina. Mike sat back from the screen far enough that the chair creaked, and thought about Earl Tucker's coffee can of stove bolts, and a number folded into a desk drawer that Earl hadn't signed yet. The county property appraiser's office occupied the ground floor of the courthouse annex, fluorescent lit, smelling like the inside of a filing cabinet that had been left open too long, every surface beige in a way that suggested the county had bought 1 color of paint sometime in 1991 and never bought a second can. The clerk at the records counter had a nameplate reading Susan Phillips and a cardigan. Despite the air conditioning fighting a war it had clearly already lost against the building's own thermostat. She had the unhurried efficiency of someone who'd worked the same counter long enough to know every regular by sight and most of their business by heart. Plat books or sales records, she said before Mike had finished explaining what he wanted. Sales records. Waterfront parcels, last year and a half, north side of the inlet. You buying or you nosy? Nosy. Most honest answer I've gotten all week. She pulled up something on her own terminal, turned the monitor a few degrees so he could see it without crowding behind the counter. An act of generosity that probably violated some policy nobody enforced. You want the ones that sold quick or the ones that sat? Quick. Those'll be these 4. She tapped through screens with the speed of muscle memory, pulled up deed after deed, and Mike watched the pattern confirm itself in black and white that the library computer had only sketched in outline. Same buyer entities. Same closing agent listed on 3 of the 4. Same appraisal firm, Whitcomb & Sons, valuing every parcel at numbers that ran, in every single instance, comfortably above what the tax rolls had carried the year before. Whitcomb runs generous, Mike said. Whitcomb runs whatever number gets the deal closed fast, is what half this town thinks, though nobody's proved a thing, and Lord knows I'm not the one to prove it sitting here. Susan Phillips said it lightly, like gossip dressed up as professional observation, the local sport of a small county office. Same notary signed off on 3 of these too. Karen Wilson, works out of a UPS store on Route 1, does closings on the side. Sweet woman. Busiest little stamp in this county the last year, way her name keeps showing up. She notarized for anybody else. Anybody not connected to these 4 companies. Couldn't tell you off the top. That's not something I'd have reason to track. Susan slid the monitor back to its original angle, the generosity having reached its natural limit. I'll tell you what I do know, since you're being honest about being nosy, instead of pretending you're a Sunday hobbyist. Earl Tucker's marina is the only working waterfront parcel left in that whole stretch that hasn't sold. Every other lot from the old bait shop clear up to his fence line belongs to one of those 4 names now. He know that. I'd imagine he's starting to. She closed the file with the particular finality of a woman who had 3 more people in line behind Mike, and a lunch break that wasn't getting any longer for waiting. You want my advice free of charge. Somebody's buying up a half-mile of nothing special waterfront for numbers that don't make sense unless the nothing special part is about to stop being true. County's been talking about a deepwater channel dredge for the cruise traffic out of Fort Pierce for going on a decade. Somebody finally believes it's happening. Mike thanked her, left a county office with more questions than he'd walked in with, which was usually a sign he was somewhere close to the actual shape of the thing. The Colusa KVFW Hall hosted the Chamber of Commerce meeting on the 3rd Thursday of the month, same as it had for as long as anybody could remember. Folding chairs set up in rows under a ceiling fan rotation that did more to move the heat around than to cool it. A card table by the door holding a sheet cake from Publix, and a coffee urn that had clearly seen action in several previous decades. By the time Mike slipped in near the back, the room was maybe 2/3 full. A mix of shop owners, a city commissioner working the room like a man up for re-election because he was, a couple of retirees there mostly for the cake, and at the front, in front of a screen propped on an easel that kept sliding a half-inch to the left every time somebody walked too close to it, stood Roger Hammond. He had the look of a man who'd practiced looking comfortable in rooms like this one. Khakis pressed, golf shirt with a logo Mike didn't recognize stitched small over the heart, a watch that cost more than the truck most of the men in folding chairs had driven over in. He worked the front row before the meeting even started, two-handed handshakes, first names recalled with the kind of accuracy that suggested either a genuine gift or a staffer feeding him names through an earpiece nobody could see. Earl Tucker sat near the back, arms crossed, a posture that hadn't shifted once since Mike walked in, like a man attending his own deposition. "They give you cake yet?" Dewey Pruitt said, sliding into the seat next to Mike uninvited, paper plate already balanced on one knee. "Get the corner piece if there's any left." More frosting. Didn't come for the cake, Dewey. Everybody says that. Then everybody eats the cake. Dewey nodded toward the front, toward Hammond, who'd reached the city commissioner, and was laughing at something with his whole head thrown back, the kind of laugh that arrived a beat too fast to be about whatever the commissioner had actually said. That's him. Sandpiper fella. Sweet talker. You met him? Shook my hand at the bait shop. Told me he loved fishing. I asked him what he fishes for, and he didn't have an answer ready, which tells you everything, far as I'm concerned. Dewey forked a bite of cake with his 3 remaining fingers, managing the plastic fork without apparent difficulty, decades of practice making up for what the winch had taken. Man who loves fishing's got an answer ready. That man's got a speech ready. The meeting started a few minutes past schedule, the commissioner doing 5 minutes of business nobody in the room cared about, a parking ordinance, a request for volunteers for the 4th of July committee, and then turned the floor over to Hammond with the particular warmth of a man who'd already decided which side of this he was on. Friends, Hammond said, and let it sit a beat, the practiced pause of somebody who'd given this exact opening more than a few times in more than a few rooms. I want to talk to you tonight about quiet waters. Not as a developer talking to a town, as a neighbor talking to neighbors, because that's what I hope to be if you'll have me. The slide behind him showed a rendering. Boardwalk, palm trees, a sailboat that looked nothing like any sailboat actually tied up at Tucker's Marina, families walking dogs along a waterfront that had been digitally scrubbed of every bait shop and trailer yard that currently occupied it. This town's waterfront has been an afterthought for 40 years, Hammond said. We want to make it the heart of this community again. Restaurants. A public promenade. Slips for the boats you already own. Upgraded infrastructure this county hasn't invested in since the Reagan administration. And jobs. Permanent jobs, not just construction jobs, though Lord knows we'll need plenty of those too. A woman 2 rows up ran the dry cleaner on Indian River Drive. By the look of the uniform she still had on, raised a hand without waiting to be called on. Who's paying for all this? Our investment partners believe deeply in this community, Hammond said, smooth, no hitch in it at all. A group of private investors who've looked at a dozen waterfronts up and down this coast and chose this one because they see what I see. What's the group called? Sandpiper Holdings represents the development side. The capital comes through several partner entities, structured the way most large-scale investment is structured these days, for tax and liability purposes. I won't bore you with the legal architecture tonight. Hammond smiled at that, inviting the room to smile along with him at how boring legal architecture was, and most of the room did, except the dry cleaner, who sat back down looking like she'd gotten an answer shaped like an answer without actually being one. Earl Tucker hadn't moved. Hadn't raised a hand, hadn't said a word, just sat with his arms crossed and his face doing the math it had been doing since that letter landed in his coffee can drawer. A man Mike didn't know, owned the hardware store, somebody murmured, asked about timeline. Hammond gave a number that sounded specific and meant nothing. 18 to 24 months from final acquisitions, contingent on permitting, contingent on a county dredge project everybody in the room seemed to already half believe was coming, whether Hammond's slides showed it or not. And if folks don't want to sell, the hardware store man said. Then we build around them, Hammond said, easy, hands spread wide, the universal gesture of a reasonable man being reasonable. Nobody's forced to do anything. We've been blessed so far with owners who share the vision. Blessed did a lot of quiet work in that sentence, and Mike watched it land on Earl Tucker's face like a stone dropped from a height. The Q&A wound down into smaller stuff. Parking during construction, whether the promenade would have public restrooms, whether the dredge project would mess with the manatee population, a question that got Hammond's most earnest face of the night, all concern, all reassurance. We've engaged an environmental consultant, friends. This is being done the right way. And when the commissioner finally closed the meeting out, the room broke into knots of conversation, paper plates, the coffee urn getting a second wave of traffic. Mike caught Hammond near the cake table, working a smaller circle of stragglers, and waited him out with the patience of a man who'd waited out worse company in worse rooms. "Mr. Hammond." Mike put a hand out. "Mike Ramble." Something flickered across Hammond's face. There and gone, the half-second recalculation Mike had watched 100 strangers run on the beach. Except Hammond's version came with a smoother recovery, a salesman's recovery, the kind that didn't let the smile drop even while the wheels turned underneath it. "The Mike Ramble," Hammond said, taking the hand, working the grip a half-second too long, a politician's habit even though he wasn't one. "I heard you'd settled down this way. Didn't realize you were a chamber member." "I'm not. Friend invited me." "Not a lie, not really." Dewey, having issued the invitation in the form of cake commentary. "Heard a lot about Sandpiper. Figured I'd come see the pitch for myself." "And?" "Convinced." "Curious," Mike said. "Curious who's actually behind the partner entities you didn't want to bore us with." Hammond's smile held, a professional hold, but something underneath it tightened a fraction. The kind of tension you'd only catch if you'd spent 20 years getting paid to catch exactly that kind of thing. "That's not a secret, Mr. Ramble. Just not a town hall topic. Investors prefer their privacy. I'm sure a man with your background appreciates the value of that more than most." "My background's mostly why I appreciate the opposite." "Fair." Hammond laughed, a real one this time, shorter than his stage laugh, and for a second he looked almost likable, almost like a man who believed at least some of his own pitch. "Look, between us, off the record since I doubt you're writing for the paper. This isn't some shadowy thing. It's capital. Capital likes to stay quiet, that's all it is, nothing sinister in it. You spend 20 years doing what you did. You must have worked with plenty of money that didn't want its name on anything either. Some of it turned out fine. Some of it didn't. Story of every dollar ever spent, I'd imagine." Hammond reached into his shirt pocket, came out with a card, crisp, embossed, handed it over with the same two-handed warmth he'd given the city commissioner. "You ever want to talk specifics, real specifics, not town hall talking points, call that number. I find men like you ask better questions than the ones I get up there." He nodded toward the easel, the rendering, the dog-walking families who didn't exist yet. "Most folks just want to know if their dock's getting bigger. You want to know who's actually paying for the dock. I respect that." "Who is?" Hammond opened his mouth, and for 1/2 of 1 second, Mike thought he might actually answer it, the way men sometimes did when flattery had loosened something in them they hadn't meant to loosen. And then Hammond's phone buzzed against his hip, twice, sharp, a specific ringtone he clearly recognized, because his hand went to his pocket before the second buzz finished. He glanced at the screen. Whatever was on it took the color down a shade in his face, fast, the kind of fast that didn't come from a wrong number or a calendar reminder. "Have to take this," Hammond said, already half turned away, the salesman's warmth gone out of his voice like a light switched off mid-sentence. "Good talking to you, Mr. Ramble. Call that number." He was moving toward the side door before he finished the sentence, phone already at his ear, voice dropping low enough that Mike caught only 3 words clear across the emptying hall, "No, not here," before the door swung shut behind him and cut the rest of it off. Chapter 5. Tucker's Marina ran a single charter boat that summer, a 1986 Hatteras named Real Time that Tommy Garcia kept running through a combination of duct tape, prayer, and a marine mechanic in Fort Pierce who owed him money from a poker game nobody remembered the details of anymore. Tommy was 34, built like he'd been welded together out of spare boat parts himself, sunburned permanently into a shade somewhere between teak and brick. Mike found him hosing down the transom, line of dead ballyhoo still on ice in a cooler that hadn't sold to the dock cleaning crew yet. "Earl said you might know a fella," Mike said. Don Hayes. Bookkeeper type, soft hands, wore glasses too thin for his face. Tommy didn't stop posing. "Half-price Hayes. That a nickname or a coupon?" "Coupon." Tommy killed the water. Coiled the hose with the automatic efficiency of a man who'd coiled 10,000 hoses in his life. Ran him out on a half-day trip back in the spring. Slow season special. Fella didn't know a grouper from a goldfish, but he tipped good. And he talked the whole way out about how much he hated his job. I liked him fine. He been around lately. Showed up maybe 2 weeks back. Didn't want a charter. Wanted to know, did I still know Wanda? Tommy looked at Mike a beat, weighing something behind his eyes that had nothing to do with fish. "You CIA fella's been asking around about him. Used to be CIA. Now, I'm just a fella." "Sure." Tommy hung the hose on its hook, wiped his hands on a rag that had given up being a rag sometime in the last decade. "Wanda's anchored back in Otter Creek, off the mangroves, third bend past where the channel marker fell over in the last hurricane, and nobody's fixed it since. Boat called Alimony. You'll know it when you see it, on account of nothing else back there's still floating on purpose." "She gonna mind me showing up?" "She's gonna mind regardless of what you do. That's just Wanda. Bring beer. Cheap beer, not the fancy stuff. She thinks fancy beer's an insult." Tommy nodded toward the dingy dock at the end of the pier. "Take the green skiff. Earl won't care. Tide's running out, so you got maybe 2 hours before you're walking that creek instead of paddling it." Otter Creek wound back from the inlet through a stretch of mangrove that had survived 3 hurricanes and 1 failed marina expansion attempt, purely by being too tangled and too shallow for anybody to bother developing it. Red mangrove roots arched up out of the black water like the legs of something that hadn't finished deciding what shape to be. A heron stood one-legged on a half-sunk crab trap and watched the skiff go by with the offended patience of a landlord checking on a tenant who'd stopped paying rent. Mike found the channel marker Tommy mentioned, toppled sideways into the mud, its reflector tape peeling, and rounded the bend past it into a wider pool where 4 boats sat at anchor in various stages of giving up on the idea of ever moving again. A houseboat with a tarp roof and a generator running. A center console with no motor at all. Sitting on blocks somebody had floated out there for reasons known only to themselves. A sailboat with no mast. And past those, half hidden behind a mangrove islet, the Alimony, a 1974 Morgan, hull the color of a bruise that had mostly healed, rigging tied off at odd angles, solar panels bunched to the deck at an angle that suggested they'd been installed by someone optimistic rather than someone who understood physics. A chicken stood on the bow rail. An actual chicken, white with brown speckles, balanced there like it had been doing this its whole life, which Mike supposed it probably had. "That's far enough," a voice said, before Mike had the skiff within 30 yards. "I got a spear gun, and I know how to use the thing, which is more than I can say for half the men who've pointed one at me." Wanda Smith stood up from behind the mast where she'd been sitting cross-legged on the deck, 60-some years old, gray hair in a braid down to the middle of her back, wearing a tank top that had been tie-dyed sometime during a presidential administration nobody currently in office remembered fondly. And she did in fact have a spear gun, held low and lazy but held. "Tommy Garcia sent me," Mike called back. "Brought beer." Tommy sends everybody. Man's never met a stranger he didn't want to introduce to my boat. She squinted at him across the water, the way everybody in this story squinted at him eventually, and Mike braced for the recognition he'd come to expect on a 4-second delay. It didn't come. Wanda Smith, it turned out, watched approximately 0 hours of cable news a year, which made her, by a wide margin, the easiest conversation Mike had had in 3 years. "Cheap beer," Mike added, since Tommy had specified. "Well, hell. Come on then." She lowered the spear gun, leaned it against the mast like it was a broom she'd finished sweeping with. And the chicken on the bow rail clucked once, unbothered, and went back to whatever it had been contemplating. He tied the skiff off and climbed aboard into a cockpit cluttered with rope, a 5-gallon bucket of what looked like actual gold doubloons but turned out on a second look to be chocolate coins from some long-ago Christmas, a cooler, and a second chicken sitting in a milk crate lined with a beach towel like it was a throne. "That's Senator," Wanda said, nodding at the chicken in the crate. "Other ones, Congressman. I name 'em after whoever's annoying me that year. Then I eat the one I like less come Thanksgiving, and the survivor gets a new name and a new lease. That a system. It's the only government program in this country that's ever made sense to me." She took the 12-pack he offered, cracked one open without offering him the courtesy of waiting, and dropped into a folding chair bolted to the deck with hose clamps. "You're looking for my house guest. If he's here." Didn't say he was. Didn't say he wasn't. She drank, looked at Mike over the can with an expression that had gone from lazy to sharp in the time it took to swallow. "Tommy vouched for you. He's the one who sent me. Tommy'd send the devil himself if the devil tipped good on a charter." She considered that, considered Mike a while longer, the chicken named Senator making a soft sound from its milk crate that might have been agreement. "He's below. Hasn't come up top in 2 days except to use the head, and even then he looks both ways like the mangroves are gonna jump him. Mind if I go down? Mind if you scare him into doing something stupid on my boat? Yeah, I'd mind that plenty. This thing don't run, mister, but it's still my home, and I don't need a panic attack happening in my own cabin on a Tuesday. I'm not here to scare him. Everybody says that right before they scare somebody." She tipped her head toward the companionway hatch, propped open with a boat hook for ventilation. "Go slow. Say your name first thing, loud, before he can see your face good. Man's been jumping at shadows." The cabin smelled like diesel that hadn't run an engine in years, mildew, and instant coffee, dim with the curtains drawn over every porthole. And in the gloom toward the bow, sitting on a settee cushion gone gray with age, Don Hayes looked up from a paperback he wasn't actually reading with the particular stillness of a man who'd practiced recently and badly, not flinching at sounds. "Don Hayes," Mike said, loud, the way Wanda told him to, before his eyes had even adjusted enough to see the man's face clear. "Name's Mike Ramble. I'm not police, not from the company, not here to hurt you." Hayes's glasses caught what little light came down the hatch, and behind them his eyes had the raw, scrubbed look of a man who hadn't slept right in longer than he'd admit. "I know who you are," Hayes said. His voice came out thin, like something that had been wrung out and hung up to dry too many times. "You're the one she sent." "She who?" "Don't." Hayes set the paperback down, hands shaking just slightly, not from fear exactly, more like a battery running too low to hold steady. "Don't do the thing where you pretend you don't know who I mean. I'm not stupid. I did the company's books for 11 years. I know exactly how this works. Somebody at Sandpiper got nervous. Somebody called somebody. And that somebody hired a guy who used to be in the actual CIA to come find me on a houseboat full of chickens, because that's apparently what 11 years of an honest paycheck gets a man in this state. Wanda's boat's not a houseboat. She'd want that corrected." It wasn't much of a joke, and it didn't land much like one, but something in Hayes's shoulders dropped half an inch anyway, the smallest possible release of pressure, like a kettle easing just shy of the whistle. "You gonna hand me over to her?" Hayes said. "The woman who hired you?" "Depends what you tell me." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got right now." Mike found a spot on a second cushion across the narrow cabin, and sat, slow, the way you sit down near a spooked animal, no fast moves, hands visible. "I don't know your whole situation, Hayes. I know you took a box of files and a laptop and ran. And I know a man in a gray sedan sat outside your motel room watching your door 2 days before you cleared out for good. That tells me somebody scared you bad enough to live on a boat that doesn't float anywhere, with 2 chickens for company, instead of going home." Hayes laughed, short and without any joy in it at all. "Senator and congressman," he said. "She's not wrong, naming him that. This whole thing, it's exactly like that. Everybody up and down this deal's got a fancier name for the same ugly bird. Tell me what's in the box." Hayes was quiet a long moment, the boat creaking gently against its anchor line, water slapping the hull in a rhythm that had probably been the only thing keeping the man sane for the last week and a half. "I did the books," he said finally. "Sandpiper and the other 3, Trade Wind, K Vista, Blue Water. Same set of books, really, just dressed up 4 different ways so nobody outside could see they were all one hand moving 4 fingers. I knew that part going in. Didn't love it, but I'm a bookkeeper, not a priest, and the money came regular, and nobody asked me to break a law I could point to on a page." "What changed?" "About 4 months back, the wires started coming in different." Hayes pulled his knees up, wrapped his arms around them, a posture that made him look smaller and younger than 56. "Bigger numbers. Out of state, Virginia mostly, through a couple of intermediary accounts that didn't make sense for a Florida marina deal. Banks I'd never had a reason to touch in 11 years of doing this. And every single one of those wires, within a week, kicked off an outgoing payment. Same line item every time. Consulting fee. Same payee every time. Name I'd never heard before in 11 years. And I'd heard every name there was to hear in this business by then. Reynolds." Hayes's head came up fast, and for a second the fear in his face shifted into something closer to surprise, like Mike had reached into the dark and pulled out exactly the thing Hayes had been most afraid somebody already knew. "You know him." "I know the name. Don't know the man." "Nobody knows the man. That's the whole. That's why I ran. That's the part one couldn't make sit right in my head." Hayes's voice picked up speed now, the words coming faster, like a dam that had held back longer than it should have. "I've done books for a lot of dirty money in my life, Mr. Ramble. I'm not going to sit here and pretend my hands are clean, but dirty money I've handled before, it always traces somewhere. Always got a name behind the name, a face behind the shell, even if it takes digging. This didn't trace anywhere. I spent 3 nights running it down on my own time, on my own laptop, after hours, and every road just dead-ended in another blank LLC, another registered agent in another state, until it disappeared completely into an account I couldn't even confirm existed." "How much money?" "Over the 4 months. North of $6 million. Hayes said the number flat, the number itself having long since stopped being the scary part. $6 million, moving from Virginia into a marina redevelopment deal in a town most of the country couldn't find on a map, paid out as consulting fees to a man with no public record, no LinkedIn, no court filings, no nothing. You don't move that kind of money that quiet for a marina, Mr. Ramble. Marinas don't need $6 million of quiet money. Marinas need permits and dredge contractors, and a guy who knows how to grease a county inspector. I've seen that kind of money before, both kinds, the loud kind and the quiet kind, and this was never the loud kind." "What's the quiet kind by, in your experience?" "Influence," Hayes said. "Or insurance. Sometimes both, dressed up the same." He unwrapped his arms from his knees, reached under the settee cushion he'd been sitting on, and came out with a single folded sheet, soft at the creases from being folded and unfolded too many times, handed it across the narrow cabin like it weighed more than paper should. "That's the wire detail, on the last payment. 2 weeks before I left. I kept this one separate from the box in case, I don't know. In case something happened to the box." Mike unfolded it in the dim light. A wire transfer confirmation. Account numbers redacted by Hayes's own hand in heavy black marker, but the payee line clear, L. Reynolds, Consulting Services. Memo line, 3 words that didn't belong on a marina invoice by any stretch. Final phase, Tucker. Final phase, Mike said. That's what scared me worse than anything else in that box. Hayes's hands had started shaking again, worse this time. Whatever this is, it's not starting. It's finishing. And I'm the only person outside whoever's running it who's seen the whole shape of the money, which means I'm either going to end up a witness somebody wants real bad, or a loose end somebody wants gone. And I have spent 11 years being a careful man specifically, so I would never have to find out which one of those I am. Above them, on deck, Wanda's voice carried down through the open hatch, easy and unbothered, talking to one of her chickens about something that didn't carry clearly enough to make out, the kind of normal, ridiculous sound that made the cabin's dim tension feel briefly, almost unbearably absurd. $6 million and a man named Reynolds and a marina's final phase, all of it sitting 20 feet from a chicken named after a sitting U.S. senator. You gonna tell her? Hayes said, quieter now, nodding up toward the hatch, toward the world outside it. Toward Jenny Baker specifically, though he didn't say the name. The woman who hired you. You gonna tell her I'm here, hand her the box, collect whatever she's paying you, and that's that. I don't know yet. That's not good enough, Mr. Ramble. I need a yes or a no, because if it's yes, I need a head start, and if it's no, I need to know what you're actually offering me instead, because right now all I've got is a boat that doesn't float, 2 chickens, and a sheet of paper that might be the only thing standing between me and an unmarked grave somewhere west of the turnpike. Mike looked at the wire confirmation again. At final phase, Tucker sitting there in black ink like it had been waiting specifically for him to read it. And thought about Earl Tucker's coffee can full of stove bolts, and a number folded into a desk drawer the old man hadn't signed yet, and a whole half-mile of waterfront that had quietly become 4 fingers of the same hand. Whoever hired me wants the box back, Mike said. Wants it back intact, wants you handled gentle, her word not mine. She didn't say what happens to you after that, and I didn't ask, because 3 years ago, I'd have known better than to take a job with that big a hole left open in the middle of it. And now I'm asking. The water slapped the hull again, and somewhere up the creek, a fish broke the surface loud enough to carry, and Hayes opened his mouth to answer, and then didn't, his whole body going rigid instead, eyes fixed on the open hatch above them, on a sound that had just cut through Wanda's one-sided chicken conversation from somewhere out past the mangrove islet. An outboard motor. Running slow, careful, idling its way up a creek that wasn't supposed to have any reason for a stranger's boat to be idling up it at all. Chapter 6. The outboard motor cut out before it ever cleared the mangrove islet, sputtering down to an idle and then to nothing at all. And for 10 long seconds, the only sound on Otter Creek was water against 4 hulls that didn't go anywhere, and a chicken on a milk crate making a low, conversational noise to itself. Stay below, Mike said, already moving for the companionway, low and quick, the old economy of motion coming back into his legs like it had never left. Up top, Wanda Smith hadn't moved from her folding chair, spear gun back across her knees, watching the bend in the creek with the unbothered attention of a woman who dealt with worse interruptions to her afternoon than this. Relax, she said without turning her head. That's Skeeter's boat. Engine's been dying like that for 2 years. Man won't replace a $40 carburetor on principle. A second later, a flat-bottom John boat nosed around the mangrove islet. An old man in a straw hat working a paddle in short, irritated strokes, muttering at the outboard the way you'd mutter at a dog that wouldn't come when called. Skeeter, Wanda called out, you scaring my chickens again. Carburetor's possessed, Skeeter called back, not looking up from his paddling, steering himself toward the houseboat with the tarp roof, clearly a stop on a route he ran most days, clearly uninterested in anything else anchored in the creek. Tell Senator, I said, hey. Senator, don't talk to Republicans. Senator's a chicken, Wanda. That's what makes him qualified. Skeeter didn't answer that one, just kept paddling, and the whole exchange had the rhythm of two people who'd had some version of this conversation 40 times before, and would have it 40 more, and within a minute he'd tied off at the houseboat and disappeared inside it, and the creek went back to being nothing but water sound and birdsong, and the particular hush of a place too tangled for anybody important to bother with. Mike came back up the companionway steps to find Hayes pressed against the bulkhead at the foot of them, breathing like he'd run somewhere instead of just sitting still and being afraid. "That's Skeeter," Mike said. "Wanda's neighbor. Carburetor trouble." "You don't know that. You don't know it wasn't." "I know it, because Wanda knew it before either one of us had time to be scared, and she's not the type who'd waste calm on the wrong moment." Mike sat back down across from him, slower this time, giving the man's nervous system a chance to catch back up to where it had been before the outboard noise. "You can't live like this much longer, Hayes. 2 more weeks on a boat that doesn't float, jumping at every old man with a bad carburetor. You're gonna have a heart attack before anybody from Sandpiper ever lays a hand on you." "What am I supposed to do, exactly? Go home? Sit in my apartment in Stewart and wait for somebody clean-shirted and polite to knock on my door?" "No. But you can't keep sitting here either. That's not a plan. That's just a delay with a chicken attached to it." Hayes laughed again, the same short, joyless sound from before, but something had shifted in his face since the paddle and the false alarm. Not relief exactly, more like a man recalculating how much longer his nerves could absorb this particular flavor of fear before something in him broke clean through. "Give me a day," Mike said. "I'm not handing you to anybody yet. Not the woman who hired me, not anybody else. I need to find out exactly what I'm standing in the middle of before I move you anywhere, because right now I don't know who's safe to call and who isn't. And I'd rather be slow and right than fast and dead wrong. And if you decide I'm not worth the trouble, if it turns out handing me in the box over's the smart play for you, then I'll tell you to your face before I do it. That's the only promise I've got, and it's worth exactly what you decide it's worth." Hayes studied him a long moment in the dim light coming down the hatch, glasses catching a stray beam off the water outside, and whatever he found in Mike's face seemed to settle something, at least for the length of one afternoon. "One day," Hayes said, "and leave the box with me. I've kept it safe this long. I'd rather it stay where I can see it than ride around in your truck where I can't." "Fair enough." Wanda walked him back up on deck once the conversation below had wound down to nothing left worth saying, and stood at the rail watching him climb back into the green skiff with the same unhurried scrutiny she'd given him on arrival. "You're not what I figured," she said. "What did you figure?" "Figured you'd be colder." Tommy said CIA, like it was supposed to scare me into being polite. She glanced back toward the open hatch, toward the man hiding below her deck among her chickens and her chocolate doubloons. "He eats my food and don't pay rent and scares easy as a cat in a thunderstorm, but he's decent. Doesn't deserve whatever's chasing him. Most people who end up running don't. Most people who end up chasing, though." Wanda picked the spear gun back up off the deck, more out of habit than threat at this point, and looked at Mike with an expression that had gone for just a second entirely serious. "You bring trouble back up this creek, mister. You bring it on you, not on him. I got a spear gun, and I got opinions about men who use scared people as a path to somebody else's money. I'm not here for the money. Everybody says that, too." She said it without much heat, more observation than accusation, and pushed off the rail to go check on her chickens. Conversation closed the way she seemed to close most conversations, on her own schedule and nobody else's. The tide had turned against him on the way back out, the way Tommy promised it would, and Mike spent the better part of an hour working the skiff through water shallow enough in places that the outboard's prop kicked up mud, The heron from earlier, watching his slow progress from a new perch with what looked from a distance like genuine disappointment in his navigation. He didn't call Jenny that evening. Told himself it was because the timing wasn't right. The light was wrong. He needed to think it through first. A string of reasons that all amounted to the same thing. He wasn't ready yet to hear what her voice did with the question he was about to ask. He made the call the next morning instead, sitting on his own back step with a cup of coffee gone half cold beside him, the window unit rattling its usual complaint through the jalousie windows behind him. Mrs. Alvarez's dachshund working its same loop 2 doors down, like the whole world hadn't shifted under Mike's feet sometime in the last 18 hours. Jenny picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you've got eyes on him," she said. No hello, straight into it. The particular efficiency of a woman who didn't waste breath on pleasantries when there was a status to be reported. "I've got eyes on him." "Good." A small exhale on the other end, something close to relief, though with Jenny it was never easy to tell relief from satisfaction. "Where?" "Not telling you yet." The pause that followed ran a half-second longer than it should have, and Mike sat with the phone against his ear, listening to the particular shape of that silence, the kind that comes from somebody recalculating instead of simply being surprised. "Excuse me?" "I found him, Jenny. He's safe, he's scared, and I'm not ready to tell you exactly where he's sitting until I understand a little more about what I'm walking him into." "That's not the job, Mike. The job is find him, get the laptop and the files, bring them back. I didn't hire you to negotiate the terms of his surrender on his behalf. I'm not negotiating anything yet. I'm asking you a question, and I'd like an honest answer, because the honest answer's gonna decide what I do next." He looked out at the yard, at a lizard doing push-ups on the fence post like its life depended on the performance, and kept his voice level, the tone he used to use in rooms where the wrong inflection cost you the whole conversation. "Is he safe, Jenny? If I bring him in, hand over the box, walk him back into the world, is Don Hayes safe after that?" There was a pause. Not the recalculating pause from before. A different one, shorter and somehow worse for being shorter, like a door closing fast instead of slow. "Where are the files?" she said. Mike sat very still on the step, coffee cooling further beside him, and let that land all the way down before he answered it. "That's not what I asked you. It's the question that matters right now. The laptop, the banker's box, where are they physically this minute? That's the only thing my client cares about, and frankly, it's the only thing you're being paid to care about either." "You didn't answer me about Hayes." "Because I don't know the answer, Mike, and I'm not going to lie to you and pretend I do." Her voice had gone clipped now. All the warmth of yesterday's diner booth burned off it like morning fog. "I don't control what happens to him once the files are recovered. I never said I did. I told you to find him and bring the box back intact and handle him gentle, and I meant all of that, every word, but I can't promise you a future I don't have any say in." "Then who does have a say in it?" "My client." "And who's that, Jenny? 3 years and you still won't give me a name." "Because I gave my word I wouldn't. And my word is the only inventory I've got left in this business, same as it ever was." She said it like a fact she'd long since stopped apologizing for, and underneath the clipped tone, Mike heard something else now, something that might have been the first honest note of the whole call. Not malice, not even indifference, just a woman standing on a floor that had started very slightly to tilt under her own feet, and choosing not to look down at it. "I am asking you, as a professional courtesy, I don't owe you anymore, but I'm extending anyway, to tell me where the box is. Today. Before this gets more complicated than either one of us wants it to be." "More complicated, how?" "I don't know yet. That's the truth, same as the last one. I just know complications don't wait politely for permission, and the longer that box sits wherever it's sitting, the more time it has to find its own way into somebody else's hands. Hands that aren't mine, and aren't yours, and won't be half as patient about asking nicely. Mike thought about a folded wire confirmation in Hayes's shaking hands, final phase, Tucker in 3 words that meant more than the rest of the page combined, and a gray sedan idling in a parking lot 2 rows back from a police station, headlights coming on a half-second too late to be nothing. "I'll think about it," he said. "That's not an answer either." "It's the only one I've got right now," Mike said. The same line he'd given Hayes the day before, and it occurred to him as he said it that he was running the same speech twice in 2 days for 2 different people who were both, in their own way, asking him to choose a side before he'd finished deciding there were sides to choose between. "Mike." Her voice softened, just slightly, the diner booth version of her, trying to find its way back through whatever had hardened over the last 2 minutes. "I called you because I trust you, and because the job needed somebody who could disappear into it without leaving a mess behind. Don't make me regret the trust part. You should have thought about that before you answered my question about Hayes with a question about the files." She didn't have anything ready for that, and the silence that followed ran long enough that he could hear, faint underneath it, the specific echo of a parking garage or a stairwell, the same flat concrete sound from the first call 3 nights ago, like she conducted her whole life lately in places designed to swallow noise rather than hold it. 48 hours, she said finally. "That's what we agreed to at the diner. You've used most of it already." "I remember what we agreed to." "Then don't make me come find him myself," she said. And there wasn't any threat in it, exactly, more like a tired warning from somebody who'd already watched this kind of standoff go badly enough times to know roughly how it ended. "I'd rather it be you who brings him in. I meant that yesterday, and I mean it today. But I've got a client breathing down my neck, and clients who breathe that hard usually have other numbers in their phone besides mine." She hung up before he could ask who else's number that might be. The same trick from 3 nights ago, the line going dead with a small flat click, and Mike sat on his back step a long while after, phone in his lap, the lizard on the fence post finished with its push-ups and gone wherever lizards go when they've made their point. The job, he understood now, sitting there with cold coffee and a yard going gold in the early sun, had never actually been find a scared man and bring him home. It had been find him before somebody else does, and hand him over before that somebody else gets the chance. Jenny hadn't lied to him. Not technically, not in any sentence he could point to and call a lie outright. She just never once, across 2 conversations and 1 fat envelope of cash, asked him whether Don Hayes was going to be all right. That kind of omission, 20 years in the business had taught him, was usually the loudest sentence in the whole conversation. Chapter 7. He drove out to Tucker's Marina a little before noon, not because Earl had asked for him, just because his body wanted to be somewhere with its hands busy while his head worked through the rest of it, and found Earl up to his elbows in the fuel dock fitting Mike still hadn't finished fixing, swearing at a stripped bolt in language that would have gotten him thrown out of most churches. "You look like a man who didn't sleep good again," Earl said, not looking up. "Didn't sleep at all this time." "Woman trouble." "Something like it." Earl grunted, handed him a wrench without being asked, the universal gesture between 2 men who decided not to talk about a thing directly, and would instead talk about a fuel fitting until the real subject either surfaced on its own or didn't. They worked the fitting, another 20 minutes in near silence, the kind that didn't need filling, gulls working the dead bait scraps off the cleaning table down the pier, the AM radio in the office trailer murmuring something about a tropical wave forming off the coast of Africa that wouldn't matter to anybody in Calusa Cay for another 10 days if it mattered at all. "Got another call from Hammond's people," Earl said finally, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had given up being clean sometime around the Clinton fitting Mike had inherited the rag from. "Upped the number. 5%, they said. Like that's supposed to mean something to a man my age, who's already decided the number wasn't the problem. What is the problem? Problem's I don't know what happens to this dock once it's not mine no more. Cody's not getting trained up fast enough. My boy in Tampa's never coming back. And some part of me thinks maybe the kindest thing I can do for this whole stretch of water is take their generous number and let somebody with deeper pockets than mine keep these boats afloat. Earl said it slow, like a man trying the sentence on for size before deciding whether he believed it. Other part of me thinks my granddaddy'd come back from the dead just to slap me for thinking that, so I don't know. I truly don't know, Mike, and I've about run out of road to keep not knowing on. Mike turned the wrench over in his hand, thought about final phase, Tucker written in black ink on a wire confirmation a frightened man, kept folded under a boat cushion among the chocolate doubloons, and understood, with a clarity that settled into his chest like a stone dropped into still water, that whatever decision Earl Tucker thought he still had time to make, somebody $6 million deep into a Virginia wire transfer had probably already made it for him. Don't sign anything yet, Mike said. Not this week. Maybe not next week either. Why's that? Because I think there's more to this deal than a marina, and I haven't worked out the shape of it yet, and once you sign, there's no taking that number back to ask better questions about it. Earl looked at him a long moment, the particular look of a man deciding whether to ask the follow-up question he already half suspected he wasn't going to like the answer to. This about the CIA business after all, he said. No, Mike said. This is about your dock, Earl. That's all it's ever been about, since about 3 days ago. Earl didn't push it further, just nodded once, slow, and went back to the fitting. And the two of them worked the rest of the morning in the kind of silence that had stopped being about avoiding a subject and started being about two men quietly agreeing to trust each other a little further down a road neither one of them could see the end of yet. Cody Tucker, no relation to Earl despite what half the tourists assumed, just a kid who'd worked the dock since he was old enough to coil a line, stood at the fuel pump arguing with a guy about whether premium unleaded existed for outboards, a conversation he was losing on the merits and winning on volume, when the white panel van pulled into the marina lot and parked crooked across two spaces like it owned them. Mike noticed the van before he noticed the magnetic sign on its door, which was its own kind of tell. Most contractors backed in. This one nosed straight forward, facing out, the way you parked when you wanted a clean exit more than you wanted convenience. Atlas Coastal Surveying. The door sign read, blue letters on white, the kind of generic outfit name that could mean anything or nothing, the same family of invisible as Sandpiper Holdings and its three cousins. Two men got out. Both around 35, both built like men who lifted weights for a living, rather than men who'd come by their muscle honestly hauling traps or running lines. One carried a survey rod and a clipboard. The other carried nothing, which in Mike's experience was always the one worth watching. Help you fellas. Earl came down off the office trailer steps, wiping his hands on a rag, squinting at the van, the way he squinted at weather he didn't trust. Atlas Coastal. The one with the clipboard had a voice trained to sound friendly without committing to it, a customer service register that didn't reach his eyes. Doing a boundary and elevation survey on the parcel. Won't take more than an hour, sir. Just need to walk the dock and the seawall. Nobody told me about a survey. Should have come through your point of contact at Sandpiper. Roger Hammond's office, I believe. The clipboard man said it like a fact too boring to lie about, which was exactly the kind of lie Mike had built a career around recognizing. Might have gotten lost in the mail. Happens more than you'd think. Nothing's lost in my mail, son, because nothing's been signed. Earl planted himself between the men and the dock, 73 years old, and built like a fence post, not moving an inch. You don't survey property a man hasn't sold yet. That's not how this works. The clipboard man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes moved, fast, practiced, a half-second sweep that took in the dock layout, the fuel pumps, the seawall, the gap in the chain link by the bait shop. The kind of scan a man does when he's mapping exits and not boundaries. His partner hadn't said a word yet. Just stood with his hands loose at his sides, weight balanced even, watching Earl's hands instead of his face, the way you watch somebody you've sized up as a possible problem, and not somebody you've sized up as an old man having a bad day. Mike clocked it from the fuel dock, 20 feet off, coiling a line he didn't need to coil. Florida had no shortage of muscle for hire. Repo men, debt collectors, the occasional process server who leaned harder than the law allowed, but most of it carried itself loose and a little bored. Men who'd long since stopped expecting trouble because trouble rarely showed up for a job this dull. These two didn't carry themselves bored. They carried themselves like men who'd done a walkthrough before, who already knew where the chain link gap was before they got out of the van, who'd been briefed on a property they'd never officially had permission to set foot on. "Sir, I understand the confusion," the clipboard man said, still smiling, still patient, the patience itself starting to read less like courtesy and more like a held breath. "We're contracted regardless of where the sale negotiation currently sits. Survey work's typically done in advance, so the closing timeline doesn't get held up later. Standard practice. Standard practice is you get my signature first." Earl's voice had gone flatter, the gravel in it sharpening. "I haven't sold this dock. Might never sell this dock. You can walk back to that van and tell whoever sent you that." The silent one shifted his weight, just slightly, a redistribution Mike recognized from 100 rooms that weren't marinas, the kind of movement that meant a decision had already been made somewhere behind a calm face, and the body was just catching up to it. "While we're here," the clipboard man said, conversational, almost an afterthought, "you wouldn't happen to know a fella named Hayes? Worked for Sandpiper a while back. Bookkeeper. We heard he might have come around asking questions." There it was. "Don't know him," Earl said, too fast, the kind of fast that told the truth about how much he wished that were a lie he didn't have to manage. "Sure." The clipboard man's eyes flicked briefly to Mike at the fuel dock, a flick that lingered half a beat longer than a survey crew sizing up an irrelevant dockhand should have lingered. "And you, sir? You work here?" "When Earl pays me," Mike said. "You hear anything about a bookkeeper? Fella with glasses, soft hands, doesn't look like he belongs anywhere near salt water. A lot of fellas like that come through a marina. Buy bait, ask why the boat costs so much to gas up, leave." The clipboard man held that a second, weighing it, and something behind his eyes settled into a different gear entirely, the friendly customer service register dropping away like a coat shrugged off. "Mr. Tucker," he said, all the warmth gone out of it now, "we're going to walk the dock. You can make this easy, or you can make it a thing nobody here wants it to be. Get off my property." The silent one moved first. He came at Earl's shoulder fast and low, not a punch, a shove, the kind meant to put a 73-year-old man on the ground without leaving a mark that'd photograph well. And Mike was already off the fuel dock before he'd finished deciding to be, the line he'd been coiling dropping unspooled at his feet. He didn't get there clean. 48 years old and 3 years off the clock told him that in the first half-second, his knee catching the dock cart Cody had left at an angle by the ice chest, throwing his stride off by exactly enough to turn what should have been a smooth interception into something closer to a controlled stumble that happened to land a forearm into the silent one's chest before the man's shove connected with Earl at all. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't supposed to be pretty. 20 years of training had taught him the textbook version of this, smooth and economical. 3 motions and the threat's on the ground before he knows the fight's begun. And none of that showed up. What showed up was an old man's reflexes running an old man's program on a body that had spent the last 3 years scraping barnacles instead of running drills. And the forearm strike landed half a beat late and half a foot off target, catching the silent one in the shoulder instead of the throat, enough to stagger him but not enough to drop him. The man recovered fast. Trained fast. He came back with a short hook that caught Mike high on the cheekbone, a flash of white heat, and the salt copper taste of his own blood, and Mike went back a step into the dock cart that had already tripped him once, metal biting into his calf hard enough that he'd feel it for a week. Mike. Earl's voice somewhere behind him, and the scrape of boots on dock boards that meant the old man hadn't backed off the way a smart 73-year-old should have. The clipboard man dropped his clipboard, came around the other side fast, a flanking move executed clean enough that Mike understood, somewhere underneath the adrenaline, that these two had trained together before, knew each other's rhythm, weren't local muscle improvising a beatdown, but two men running a coordinated piece they'd rehearsed. Mike grabbed the first thing his hand found, which turned out to be the gaff hook leaning against the bait cooler. And it wasn't a weapon he'd have chosen if he'd had a choice, too long to be quick, too short to keep real distance. But it was what was there, and 20 years had also taught him that the weapon that's actually in your hand beats the weapon you wish you'd grabbed every single time. He swept it low, caught the clipboard man across the shin, and the man went down with a short, ugly sound, more surprise than pain. And Mike didn't wait to see if he got back up. He turned the gaff's haft into the silent one's ribs instead, a blunt strike that landed solid this time, no half-beat delay, and felt something give under it that might have been a rib and might have just been wind knocked loose. The silent one folded, but didn't go down all the way, caught himself against the ice chest, and came up swinging, and the next several seconds went the way real fights actually go, and not the way they go in the version of this story Mike used to tell himself about his own competence. Messy, close, more grabbing and shoving than anything that looked like the training either man had once had. Mike took a knee to the thigh that buckled his bad leg, landed an elbow that opened the silent one's eyebrow into a real, serious bleed, got his shirt collar twisted half off in a grip he had to break with a wrench of his own neck that he was going to feel tomorrow in a way that had nothing to do with the fight and everything to do with being 48. It ended when Earl Tucker, who'd had quite enough of standing there watching, brought a boat hook down across the silent one's shoulders with the flat conviction of a man who'd swung tools his whole life and had never once asked permission first. The silent one went down hard this time and stayed there, and the clipboard man, upright again, favoring the leg Mike's gaff had caught, looked at his partner on the dock boards, looked at Earl with the boat hook still raised, looked at Mike, standing bleeding from the cheek with a gaff hook in one fist, and made the only calculation a professional makes in a situation that stopped being professional. "This isn't finished," he said, breathing hard, no performance left in his voice at all now. "It is for today," Mike said. The clipboard man got his partner up by the arm, half dragging him toward the van, and the silent one's clipboard lay forgotten on the dock boards where he dropped it, papers fanned out where the wind off the inlet had caught them. Mike let them go. Didn't chase, didn't grab a phone to call anybody, just stood there with his chest heaving and his cheek throbbing in time with his pulse, watching the van back out crooked and pull onto the road too fast, fishtailing slightly on the gravel before it straightened out and disappeared north. Cody had abandoned the premium unleaded argument entirely and stood frozen by the fuel pump with his mouth open. The customer he'd been arguing with already 3 steps toward his own truck, deciding very quickly that he didn't need premium unleaded badly enough to stick around for whatever this was. "You all right?" Earl said, lowering the boat hook, hand shaking slightly now that the moment had passed and left adrenaline with nowhere left to go. "I'm fine." Mike touched his cheek, looked at the blood on his fingers, decided it wasn't as bad as it felt. "You?" "I'm 73 years old, and I just hit a man with a boat hook. I don't know what I am." Earl looked down at the boat hook in his own hand like it belonged to somebody else. That was real, wasn't it? Wasn't pretend. Wasn't some misunderstanding about a survey. Wasn't pretend. Mike limped over to where the clipboard had fallen, papers scattered across 3 feet of dock, and crouched down despite what his knee thought about the idea, gathering them up before the breeze off the inlet could finish what it had started. Most of it was exactly what it claimed to be, Elevation readings, boundary notations, the genuine technical scaffolding of an actual survey, which told Mike these two weren't pure muscle hired off a corkboard somewhere, but something closer to professionals who did real work most days and did this kind of work when the job called for it. Real surveyors who occasionally got handed a different kind of assignment. But underneath the elevation sheet, stapled to a printed site plan that hadn't come from any county office, the dock at Tucker's Marina was already drawn in. Already platted. A full marina basin where the working dock currently sat, slip counts numbered out to 48. A channel dredge line cut straight through what was currently Otter Creek's mouth, connecting clean through to the 4 other parcels Mike had already traced at the library computer. The old bait shop, the trailer yard, the seafood wholesaler's lot, all of it rendered in the same clean digital style as Roger Hammond's slideshow at the chamber meeting, the same dog-walking families, the same palm trees that didn't grow naturally anywhere within 40 miles of this coast. A title block in the corner read, Quiet Waters, Phase 3, Marina Basin and Channel. And beneath that, smaller, a notation that wasn't part of the original design template, typed in after the fact like a memo somebody had stapled on without thinking it through, Final Parcel. Confirm Tucker status with RH before Friday. Mike sat back on his heels on the dock boards, holding a rendering of a 48-slip marina basin where Earl Tucker's grandfather had built a working dock with his own hands in 1951. His cheek still bleeding, his knee throbbing in rhythm with the ache spreading up from his ribs where the boat hook's near miss had clipped him on the backswing. Phase 3. Not Phase 1, not an opening move. The final piece. The whole footprint, 4 shells, $6 million of quiet money out of Virginia, a clean-shirted man watching a motel door, 2 trained men sent to walk a dock under a survey cover story that fell apart the second somebody asked the wrong question about it. All of it had been building this whole time, toward the exact patch of waterfront Mike was kneeling on right now. This wasn't abstract anymore. It hadn't been abstract for a while, if he was honest with himself, but a piece of paper made it real, in a way the wire transfer hadn't quite managed. The way an idea becomes a fact the moment you can hold it in your hand and watch the blood from your own face drip onto the corner of it. What is that? Earl said, standing over him now, boat hook still in one fist, looking down at the rendering with the particular stillness of a man bracing for something he already suspects. Mike didn't answer right away. Behind them, out past the fuel dock, the white van had long since disappeared north on the highway. And somewhere not far behind it, Mike understood, a phone was already ringing. The clipboard man, or somebody above him, reporting back that the job had gone sideways, that the old man and the dockhand had put up more fight than the brief called for, that whoever was running this from wherever Reynolds actually sat had just lost 2 men and a piece of paper they were never supposed to lose. It's your dock, Earl, Mike said finally, holding the rendering up so the old man could see the whole of it. The 48 slips, the dredge line, the dog-walking families standing where the fuel pump currently sat. 48 slips, and your fuel dock's not in the picture anymore. Earl Tucker looked at it a long time, longer than the page deserved, his jaw working at something he didn't have words for yet. And when he finally spoke, his voice had dropped down into a register Mike hadn't heard from him before, quiet in a way that had nothing to do with calm. They sent men to walk my dock before I ever signed a damn thing, Earl said. Before I even said yes. Looks that way. And that fella, Hayes. They're looking for him too. Same men, same morning, same breath as my marina. Earl's hand tightened on the boat hook handle, knuckles going pale. Mike. What in God's name did you bring onto my dock? Down the road, faint at first and then not faint at all, a siren started up. Cody, it turned out, hadn't frozen by the fuel pump after all. He'd called it in the second the van peeled out. And now whatever Colusa KPD could spare on a Wednesday morning was on its way. Lights already visible through the scrub pine where the road bent toward the marina entrance. And Mike was still on his knees on the dock boards with a bleeding cheek, a stolen survey rendering in his hand. And no good answer yet for the only question that mattered. Chapter 8. Detective Carol Jennings arrived at the marina 9 minutes after the call went out, riding in the passenger seat of a cruiser driven by the same rookie who'd recognized Mike in the lobby 2 days before, and she was out the door before the car had finished rocking on its springs. "Don't talk yet," she said to Mike first thing, before she'd even looked at Earl or the boat hook still loose in his hand or the blood drying along Mike's cheekbone. "Not to me, not to him, not to anybody, until I've walked this whole dock once with my own eyes and decided what I'm looking at." She walked it. Slow, methodical, hands in her pockets, the rookie trailing 2 steps behind her with a notepad he kept forgetting to write anything in because his attention kept snagging on Mike's face. She studied the dropped clipboard, the scattered survey stakes nobody had actually driven into the ground, the long scuff mark where the silent one's boots had dragged across the boards going down. She picked up the gaff hook Mike had set against the bait cooler, turned it once, set it back exactly where she'd found it. "Cody," she said without turning around, "you the one called this in?" "Yes, ma'am." Cody had recovered some color since the van pulled out, though not all of it. "2 guys said they were surveyors, started something with Mr. Tucker, and then it went fast. I called soon as they hit him." "They hit Earl first?" "Tried to." The quiet one shoved at him. Mike got between. Jennings nodded, made a note this time, and walked over to where Mike stood, holding the folded rendering against his chest like a man trying not to let a draft get at it. "What's that?" "What they were really here for." Mike handed it over, watched her unfold it, watched her face do the careful, unhurried work of reading something that mattered more than its paper suggested. "Survey cover story. Real elevation work, far as I can tell, but underneath it's a site plan for a 48-slip marina basin, dredge channel and all, sitting right on top of Earl's dock and the fuel pumps. Phase 3 of something called Quiet Waters. Same Quiet Waters as Hammond's slideshow." "Same one." Jennings read the note in the corner twice. "Final parcel. Confirm Tucker status with RH before Friday." Her jaw working slightly at something she wasn't saying yet, and folded the page back along its original creases with a care that told Mike she already understood this piece of paper was going to matter a great deal more than a routine assault report. "This isn't a misunderstanding about a survey easement," she said. "No. And you got into a physical fight with 2 professionals on a dock in broad daylight, in front of witnesses, the same week you came into my station asking about a missing bookkeeper connected to the same company that apparently sent these 2. That's about the shape of it. Mike." She said his name, the way you'd set a glass down hard enough to make a point without breaking it. "I told you. Before, not after. This is after. I didn't start it. I believe you. Cody believes you. Earl believes you. And in about an hour I'm going to have a report that backs every word of it up, because that's not the part I'm worried about." She tucked the rendering into a folder she pulled from inside her blazer, the kind of folder that meant evidence now instead of curiosity. "The part I'm worried about is that 2 men showed up here ready to hurt an old man over a piece of paper, which means whoever's running this isn't playing the long, patient development game anymore. They're playing the fast, sloppy game. And the fast, sloppy game is the one that gets somebody actually killed." She took statements, Earl's first, short and gravelly and furious in a controlled way that suggested the fury was going to outlast the morning by quite a while. Then Cody's, more excited than furious, the kid clearly understanding he'd witnessed the most interesting thing that had happened in Calusa Cay since the red tide closed the beaches 2 summers back. She took Mike's last, in the office trailer, with the door shut, and the rookie sent out to canvass the parking lot for anybody who might have caught a plate off the van. "You're going to tell me everything now," Jennings said, sitting on the edge of Earl's desk rather than the chair, the posture of a woman who didn't plan on this taking long enough to need furniture. "Not the parts you think I need. Everything." So he told her. The diner, the envelope, the motel clerk and his gray sedan, Connie Whitfield and her clean-shirted stranger, the library computer, and the 4 shell companies sharing one Wilmington address, the property appraiser's office and Whitcomb & Sons, running every appraisal a little hotter than the tax rolls justified, the chamber meeting, and Hammond's smooth pitch curdling the instant his phone buzzed twice in his pocket. He didn't tell her where Hayes was. He noticed himself not telling her, the omission sitting there deliberate and obvious between them, and she noticed it too, and let it sit without forcing the issue, which told him something about how she'd decided to play this. "Reynolds," she said when he got to that part. "L. Reynolds. Consulting Services. That's the name on the wire. I'll run it. Won't find much, I'd bet money on it. A name that careful doesn't show up in a county database with his home address attached, but I'll run it anyway, because sometimes careful men get sloppy exactly once, and once is all I need." She stood, smoothed the blazer, looked at Mike with an expression that had shifted somewhere in the last 20 minutes from professional distance into something closer to a working partnership neither one of them had quite agreed to out loud yet. "Here's where we are. I've got an assault with 2 unidentified suspects, fled the scene, no plate, no names, which on its own gets me nowhere fast. What I do have now is documentary evidence of a coordinated effort to acquire this property under false pretenses, tied to a company with a documented pattern of padded appraisals, and a registered agent, shared by 3 other companies doing the same thing up and down this waterfront. That's a case. That's the start of a case. It's not enough yet. I need the appraisals on paper, side by side with the tax rolls, official copies, not library computer printouts. I need to know if Karen Wilson notarized anything she shouldn't have, and I need somebody at the county to tell me on record whether any of these closings move through a particular clerk faster than they should have." She looked at him a beat. "You said code enforcement showed up at a restaurant 4 times in 2 months, found something new wrong every visit. That clerk got a name. Restaurant guy filed a complaint here. Should be in your own system. Then I'll find it myself, instead of asking you to do my job for me a second time." She almost smiled at that, the first real one he'd seen out of her. "Get that cheek looked at. You look like you went 3 rounds with somebody half your age and lost on points." "I didn't lose." Earl hit the deciding blow with a boat hook, by his own account. "I wouldn't be feeling too proud of the scorecard if I were you." She headed for the door, then stopped, hand on the frame, and looked back at him with the particular weight of somebody about to say the real thing instead of the procedural thing. Whoever's behind this sent muscle to a public dock in daylight over a property they don't legally own yet. That's not confidence, Mike. That's a deadline. Something's pushing them, and pushing them hard, and I don't like working a case against somebody on a deadline I can't see the edges of. She left him with that, and it sat on him heavier than the bruise spreading along his cheekbone all the way through the rest of the morning. He found Susan Phillips at the same records counter 2 days later, cardigan still on despite a thermostat that had apparently never gotten the memo it was losing. And this time he came with Jennings beside him, badge doing the work that a polite ask hadn't fully managed the first time around. "Karen Wilson," Jennings said, sliding a list of parcel numbers across the counter. "Every closing she notarized in the last 18 months. I want certified copies, not the public terminal version." Susan Phillips looked at the badge, looked at the list, looked at Mike with an expression that suggested she remembered exactly which nosy stranger had been sitting at her counter asking the same kind of questions a week back, minus the badge. "Gonna take me the rest of the afternoon," she said. "And I'm gonna need a case number for the request, or my supervisor's gonna ask me why a detective's pulling 18 months of closings on a Tuesday. You'll have the number by lunch." It took until almost 5, and what came back, laid out across a borrowed conference room table in the courthouse annex with a window air conditioner working overtime against the late sun, told a story that didn't need much interpretation once you saw all of it together instead of one parcel at a time. 11 closings, all routed through the same 4 shell companies. 8 of them notarized by Karen Wilson out of her UPS store side business. 9 of the 11 appraised by Whitcomb & Sons. Every single appraisal landing within a tight, suspiciously consistent band above the prior tax assessment. Not wildly inflated, nothing that screamed fraud at a glance, just generous enough every time to make a seller feel like he was getting a fair shake instead of being herded. And running through 6 of the 11, the same easement modification recorded at the courthouse 2 weeks before each closing, granting Sandpiper Holdings or one of its 3 cousins right-of-way access across the seller's waterfront for future infrastructure improvements, language vague enough to mean anything, signed off by a county permitting clerk named Roger Castillo, whose signature appeared on every single one. "Castillo," Jennings said, tapping the name with one finger. "I know that name." Restaurant guy's complaint named a code inspector who kept finding new violations. Different department, but same building, same floor, far as I remember the org chart. Coincidence? In this county? Maybe. I've seen stranger coincidences hold up under a subpoena. She gathered the documents into a stack, careful, the motions of somebody building something she intended to keep intact. I want Castillo's personnel file. I want to know if he's had any large deposits hit his bank account in the last 18 months that don't match a county salary. And I want a forensic accountant looking at Whitcomb's books before Whitcomb has a chance to hear we're asking. That gonna take a warrant? Some of it I can get through a friend at the bank who owes me a favor from a case 3 years back that I'd rather not describe in detail. She looked at the stack a long moment, then at Mike. "This is a real case, Mike. Forged easements, a bought clerk, padded appraisals designed to make a hostile buyout look like a friendly one. That's the part that doesn't depend on your missing bookkeeper showing up anywhere. Doesn't depend on a wire transfer to a name nobody can find. This part I can build with what's sitting on this table right now." And Reynolds? Reynolds isn't on this table. Reynolds is the money. And money men like that, careful as he's been so far, don't leave themselves sitting on a county appraisal report. She closed the folder. We build what we can build. The local stuff brings down Hammond and Castillo, and probably Whitcomb too, and once that whole leg of the table's gone, whoever's standing on top of it has to either run or show his face trying to save what's left. Either way, we learn something we don't know right now. Chapter 9. Mike called Roger Hammond's number, the one off the embossed card from the chamber meeting, the next morning, and didn't bother dressing it up as anything but what it was. "I want to meet," Mike said. "Today. Someplace public, your choice, but today." "Mr. Ramble, I'd love to catch up, but I've got a county detective sitting on documents showing forged easements, a bought permitting clerk, and appraisals padded by a firm that's apparently done it 11 times in 18 months. I figured you'd want to hear that from me before you heard it from a subpoena." The line went quiet long enough that Mike could hear, faintly, a television playing somewhere behind Hammond, the particular tinny cadence of a cable news anchor reading numbers off a stock ticker. "There's a Cuban place," Hammond said finally, all the salesman warmth scraped clean off his voice. "El Faro, off Indian River Drive. 1 o'clock. Come alone." El Faro turned out to be 4 tables and a counter, a window unit, dripping condensation onto a plastic tarp somebody had taped down specifically to catch it, and a smell of roasted pork and fried plantain thick enough that Mike's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since the coffee that morning. Hammond sat in the back corner table already. No khakis today, just a plain golf shirt without the embroidered logo, looking smaller somehow than he had under the chamber hall's fluorescent lights and the easel with its sliding rendering. "You look terrible," Hammond said, nodding at the bruise that had settled into a genuinely ugly yellow-green along Mike's cheekbone. Your guys hit harder than your slideshow does. They're not my guys. Hammond said it fast, too fast, the kind of denial that confirms more than it denies. I don't run that side of things. I do the pitch, the permits, the chamber breakfasts. I don't hire, whatever those two were. Who does? Hammond didn't answer right away. A waitress came by, set down 2 cafecitos without being asked, the small thick cups steaming, and waited a beat for an order that didn't come before drifting back toward the counter. You know how this works, Mr. Ramble. Better than I do, probably, given your resume. Hammond turned the little cup a quarter turn on its saucer, the same unconscious habit Mike had watched Jenny perform in a different diner 4 days and a lifetime ago. I get a number. I get a target list. I get told which parcels matter, and which ones are just there to make the footprint look natural instead of obvious. I never once asked who's behind the partner entities, because asking is how a man like me stops getting paid. You're asking now. I'm scared now. He said it plain, no performance in it at all, and something in his face had genuinely come apart since the chamber meeting. Not broken exactly, more like a man who'd been standing on a floor he'd convinced himself was solid, and had just felt the first real give underneath it. 2 men got sent to a public dock in broad daylight, and put hands on an old man, and got into a fight a half-mile from a police station. That's not how this kind of money usually operates, Mr. Ramble. Quiet money doesn't do that. Quiet money waits, leans, pressures, pays off the right clerk, and lets the paperwork do the dirty work. It doesn't send muscle to grab a piece of paper back in the middle of the day. So why'd it happen? Because somebody's deadline got moved up. I don't know whose or why, but I felt it shift about a week ago. Emails got shorter, calls got later at night. Somebody started using the word urgent in places they never used to use it. Hammond drank half the cafecito in one go, the small cup looking almost comic in his hand. I sell waterfront, Mr. Ramble. I believe in what I sell, mostly. I think this town's waterfront could use the investment. I think the dredge project's coming, whether Sandpiper does the deal or somebody else does. That's the truth, and it's also the truth that's let me sleep fine through 18 months of structuring deals I didn't ask too many questions about. I am not built for whatever this turned into this week. Tell me about Castillo. Hammond's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the street outside, an old habit that told Mike the man had started checking exits sometime in the last 7 days and hadn't stopped since. Roger Castillo gets a check from a consulting firm that doesn't do any actual consulting, twice a year, for reviewing easement applications a little faster than the regular queue, and not asking follow-up questions he'd otherwise be required to ask. I know because I'm the one who walks the check over twice a year in cash, because that's part of my job too, whether I like saying it out loud or not. He looked at Mike directly now, something almost like relief in his face, the particular relief of a man finally setting down a weight he'd been carrying alone for too long. Whitcomb runs the numbers hot, because Whitcomb gets a bonus on every closing that comes in under budget for the buyer, which means coming in low on the appraisal that sets the buyer's leverage, and a little generous on the number we show the seller. Enough to make him feel like he won something. None of that's illegal exactly, the way it's structured. It's just rotten. And Reynolds. The name landed on Hammond, like a hand closing around his collar. I've never met him, Hammond said. Never spoken to him. I get instructions through a portal, a shared drive, encrypted, log-in credentials that rotate every 90 days, and I do what the instructions say, and the money shows up. And I never once in 18 months had a phone number or a face to put to any of it. He set the empty cup down harder than he meant to, the saucer rattling. I used to tell myself that was just how big capital operates these days. Layers, distance, plausible deniability, stacked 8 deep. I don't tell myself that anymore. Not since Tuesday. What changed Tuesday? Tuesday, I got a message through the portal that didn't read like the others. Hammond's hand had gone unsteady enough that he noticed it himself, flattened it against the table to still it. Every other instruction I've ever gotten is business language. Acquisition targets, timeline, budget. Tuesday's message used the word contain. As in, contain the Tucker situation before it becomes a liability to the broader phase rollout. I've sold real estate 18 years, Mr. Ramble. Nobody talks about an old man's marina like it's a liability to contain. People talk about money that way. Or they talk about people that way when the money's run out of patience. Mike sat with that a moment, the smell of roasting pork thick in the small room, a radio behind the counter playing something low and unhurried that had no business sitting in the same air as the sentence Hammond had just said out loud. You willing to say all this to a detective? Hammond's jaw worked, the calculation visible on his face the way it had been visible at the chamber meeting right before his phone buzzed twice and cut the moment off. If it keeps me out of whatever's coming for whoever's actually responsible, he said slowly, yes. I'll say all of it. I'm a salesman, Mr. Ramble, not a believer. I never signed on to be anybody's liability that needs containing, and I am not interested in finding out what that word means in practice. He gave Mike the portal credentials before they finished the second round of Cafecito, log in, rotating passcode pattern, the full shape of his end of it. And Mike walked out of El Faro into the afternoon heat with a man's entire complicity folded up in a phone note, and still, after all of it, after Hammond's collapse and Castillo's name and Whitcomb's padded math, the only thing anybody had on the man actually steering the money remained exactly what it had been since a frightened bookkeeper folded a wire confirmation under a boat cushion 6 days ago. A single name. No face. No address. No number that rang anywhere real. Reynolds. The tide had nothing to do with it this time. Mike took the green skiff up Otter Creek at 9 in the morning with the sun already hard overhead instead of low and gold, because some mornings don't get the courtesy of being beautiful about what they're asking of you, and this was one of them. Wanda Smith met him at the rail with a chicken under each arm, Senator and Congressman both looking unimpressed with the morning's proceedings. He's packed, she said. Such as packing means anything when a man showed up with one duffel bag and leaves with the same duffel bag, just lighter on account of he ate most of what he brought. He doing okay. He's doing like a man who's about to find out if he gets to keep breathing regular. So no. Not particularly okay. She set Senator down on the milk crate throne and kept Congressman tucked against her hip like a football. You sure about whatever you're sure about, mister? Because I've grown a little bit fond of having somebody to talk to besides these two, even if he does flinch at outboard motors. I'm not sure about much. I'm sure about this part. That'll have to do, I suppose. She looked past him, down the creek, toward the toppled channel marker and the wider water beyond it, and for a second the performance dropped clean off her face, the tie-dye and the spear gun and the chicken commentary all set aside for something plainer. You bring trouble back to my creek again sometime. You come alone, and you come honest about it first. I mean that. I'll remember that. Haze came up from below, blinking against the daylight like a man surfacing from somewhere deeper than a cabin, glasses smudged, duffel bag over one shoulder, the banker's box held against his chest with both arms the way you'd carry something that might combust if you dropped it. This is it, Haze said. Not a question. This is it. He climbed down into the skiff careful, settled the box between his feet, and looked back once at the alimony listing gently at anchor, at Wanda standing at the rail with a chicken in each arm now, the whole tableau looking like something off a postcard nobody would ever print because nobody would believe it was real. Thank you, Hayes called up to her, and his voice cracked a little on it. "Don't thank me. Thank the chickens. They did the actual, emotional labor." Wanda lifted Congressman's wing in something that might have passed for a wave. "Go on, Get. Tide's not gonna wait on your feelings." Chapter 10. The Martin County Commission chambers sat half full at 6 that evening. More bodies than Mike had seen in the room on any of his previous visits to check the public meeting calendar. Word having traveled the particular way word traveled in a town this size, not through any official channel, just through Gus's bar and the chamber breakfast circuit, and Susan Phillips mentioning to her sister-in-law that something was finally coming to a head with that marina business. Earl Tucker sat in the second row, in a collared shirt Mike had never once seen him wear, hair combed flat with water, looking like a man attending a funeral he'd decided somewhere along the way he might actually survive. Beside him, Cody sat with his hands jammed between his knees, vibrating slightly with the particular energy of a 19-year-old who'd recently discovered he might be a minor character in something that mattered. The dry cleaner from the chamber meeting sat 3 rows back with 2 other shop owners Mike recognized by face but not name. The hardware store man sat near the aisle. Dewey Pruitt had come too, scratch-off tickets nowhere in sight for once, sitting up straight like a man who understood on some level that this particular show deserved his full attention. Carol Jennings stood near the back wall in civilian clothes, arms crossed, a folder tucked under one arm, and didn't sit down the entire meeting, the posture of a woman who preferred to watch a room from a position that let her see every exit. Commissioner Gary Mitchell ran the meeting from the dais with the weary efficiency of a man who'd sat through 400 zoning variances and 1 mobile home park noise complaint that had somehow taken 90 minutes, and when he got to the agenda item, public comment, proposed Quiet Waters Development, Waterfront Redevelopment Initiative, something in the room's temperature changed. A held breath made audible across 200 folding chairs. "We'll hear from the applicant first," Mitchell said, followed by public comment. Roger Hammond stood up from the front row alone. No easel this time. No rendering with families walking dogs that didn't exist. He'd worn the same plain golf shirt from El Faro instead of the embroidered logo, and when he reached the podium, he gripped both edges of it like it might keep him upright through what was coming. "Commissioner, before I make any statement on behalf of the applicant," Hammond said, "I need the record to reflect that I'm withdrawing Sandpiper Holdings Group's application for the Quiet Waters development, effective immediately, and that I've provided Detective Jennings with documentation relevant to an ongoing investigation into the acquisition practices behind this project." A murmur went through the room, the specific texture of a murmur in a small town meeting where half the people present already half knew something was coming, and the other half had genuinely come for the mobile home noise complaint follow-up and were getting something else entirely. "Mr. Hammond," Mitchell said, leaning into the microphone with the careful neutrality of a man who'd learned the hard way not to react visibly to anything in this chamber, "are you saying you're withdrawing the application, or are you saying there's a criminal matter the Commission needs to be made aware of before proceeding?" "Both, Commissioner." Jennings stepped forward from the back wall then, not asked, not announced, just moved with the unhurried authority of somebody who decided the moment had arrived and didn't need permission to claim it. Detective Carol Jennings, Colusa KPD, working in coordination with the state attorney's office, she said, loud enough to carry without a microphone, badge visible on her belt without her needing to hold it up like a prop. "I'd ask the Commission to table any vote on this application pending an active investigation into forged easement filings, a compromised county permitting official, and appraisal fraud connected to 4 shell entities sharing common ownership. I have documentation. I'm prepared to make it available to this body and to the state attorney." The room went somewhere past murmur into something closer to a held collective breath, and in the second row Earl Tucker sat very still, hands flat on his knees, and Mike watched the old man's jaw work at something that didn't have words attached to it yet. "This commission isn't a courtroom, Detective," Mitchell said, careful. "But I think under the circumstances we'll table the vote and refer the application file to the state attorney's office for review. Is that acceptable?" "That's acceptable for tonight," Jennings said. "It won't stay acceptable indefinitely. But tonight, yes." Hammond hadn't moved from the podium, and Mitchell looked at him with the particular question on his face that the gavel hadn't quite gotten around to asking out loud. "Is there more?" And Hammond answered it without being asked. "I'd like the record to also show," he said, "that Roger Castillo, county permitting, accepted payment for expediting and approving easement applications connected to this project. I have records. I gave them to the detective this morning." He looked out at the room then, not at Mitchell, out past the dais at the rows of folding chairs, at the dry cleaner and the hardware store man, and Earl Tucker in his collared shirt. "I should have asked more questions a long time before tonight. I didn't. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just telling you the truth of it, because I think this town's owed at least that much." He stepped down from the podium into a silence that nobody in the room seemed to know what to do with, and walked out the side door before public comment had even formally opened. And nobody chased him, because nobody quite knew yet whether he was the villain of this particular evening or just the first man brave enough or scared enough to admit there'd been one. The public comment that followed ran another 40 minutes, mostly people who hadn't known any of the specifics standing up to say some version of "I always thought something about that deal felt off." The universal chorus of a small town discovering its own instincts had been right all along. Mike didn't speak. Didn't need to. Earl Tucker did, finally, standing up near the end with his voice carrying further than his usual marina gravel, saying only, "That dock's been in my family since 1951. Aim to keep it that way a while longer." And sitting back down to applause that ran longer than the sentence probably deserved. The particular generous applause of a room that wanted to give somebody a win after an hour of finding out how close they'd come to losing one. Jenny Baker was waiting in the parking lot when Mike came out, leaning against the same black sedan from the diner, arms crossed, the streetlight throwing long shadows across the asphalt and across her face in a way that made her hard to read even closer up than usual. "Heard it went well in there," she said. "Word travels fast in a parking lot full of people who just watched a deal die." "Where's the box, Jenny?" "With Detective Jennings. Has been since this morning. Hayes, too, far as I know. Sitting somewhere safe with a lawyer, and a story he's apparently decided to tell straight to the state attorney instead of to you or to me." Something crossed her face then. Brief, gone before he could name it precisely. Not anger exactly, closer to the particular recalibration of somebody watching a number come back different than the one they'd budgeted for. "You went around me," she said. "I went around the part of this where you wouldn't tell me what happened to him after. That's the only part one went around. Do you understand what you just did?" She said it without raising her voice, which somehow landed harder than if she had. "You took my client's recovery and handed it to a county detective and a state prosecutor, which means it's not quiet anymore. It's not contained anymore. It's a public record sitting on a docket where anybody can pull it." "Yeah," Mike said. "That's the idea." She looked at him a long moment, and behind her the courthouse annex emptied out slow, people drifting toward their cars in twos and threes, still talking low and fast about what they'd just watched. Dewey Pruitt's voice carrying clearest of anybody's, already building the version of tonight he'd be telling at Gus's bar for the next several months. "You made him a public witness," Jenny said, slower now, working through it out loud. "On purpose. Best way I could think of, to keep him breathing. Can't disappear a man who already told the state attorney everything he knows, not without the whole thing blowing up worse than whoever's behind this wants it to blow up. The deal's dead, either way. Killing the messenger now doesn't buy anybody anything but more attention. That's good, she said, and meant it, the admission costing her something visible even in the bad parking lot light. That's smarter than I gave you credit for, being 3 years off the clock. You should have told me what I was actually being hired to do. I told you exactly what you were being hired to do. I just didn't tell you everything underneath it, which isn't the same lie you're treating it as. She pushed off the sedan, came a step closer, close enough now that he caught the perfume again, something warm and a little spiced, the same one from the diner booth. And it struck him as strange that a smell could survive a week that had otherwise turned everything else about this woman uncertain. My client's not going to be happy. I want you to understand that clearly, because I don't think you do yet. This isn't the end of something, Mike. This is the part where somebody decides how angry they're willing to get about losing it. Who's your client, Jenny? She reached into the sedan, came out with a second envelope, thinner than the first one, and held it out without answering the question. The same move from the diner, money standing in for the conversation she still wasn't willing to have. Half what I promised, she said. Because you only did half the job I hired you for. Found the man, didn't bring me the box. I think that's fair, given the circumstances, and I think you'll take it without arguing, because you're not actually broke enough anymore to argue about it the way you would have a week ago. He took it. Didn't count it, same as before, same rule. You're not gonna answer me, he said. Not a question either, this time. No, she said. I'm not. Not because I don't trust you. Because the answer's not mine to give, same as it's been since the first phone call. And I'd think a man with your resume would understand by now that some doors don't open just because you've earned the right to knock on them harder. She got in the sedan, before he could decide whether that was an apology or a warning, dressed up to sound like one, and pulled out of the lot the same unhurried way she'd pulled out of the diner 4 days and a whole different version of this case ago. Tail lights shrinking down the dark road toward US 1. And Mike stood there in the lot with an envelope in his jacket, and the distinct, uncomfortable sense that he'd won something tonight without winning anything close to all of it. Carol Jennings found him a few minutes later, walking out alone, folder still under one arm, looking tired in the particular way of somebody who just spent a long evening doing the part of her job that actually mattered, and knew the paperwork part was only getting started. Castillo's already talking, she said without preamble, the two of them falling into step toward the parking lot's far end like this was a conversation that had been running continuously since the diner 2 days ago and had just paused for the meeting to happen around it. Talking fast, actually, once he understood Hammond beat him to it. Implicated Whitcomb inside 10 minutes. Whitcomb's lawyer called the state attorney's office before we'd even left the building. Domino. Dominoes usually fall that way once the first one tips. The interesting part's what happens when they stop falling. She glanced at him sideways, the streetlight catching the tired creases around her eyes. Hammond gave a name in his statement this morning. Wire instructions, an encrypted portal, login credentials rotating every 90 days. All of it pointing at the same name you handed me on a folded sheet of paper 4 days ago. Reynolds. Reynolds. She said it flat, the way you'd say a word that had started to feel less like a name and more like a placeholder for something the size of a name shouldn't have to carry. I ran it 11 ways since Tuesday. No state ID, no federal record, no LinkedIn, no property, nothing. Closest I got is a consulting LLC registered out of Wilmington. Surprise. That's been paid by no fewer than 6 different shell entities across 3 states in the last 2 years. And every single one of those entities eventually traces back 3 or 4 shells deep to a political action committee. Mike stopped walking. Whose? That's the part one can't get to yet. PAC filings are public technically, but the donor structure on this one runs through enough pass-throughs that it'd take a forensic accountant a month to untangle it properly. And I've got a county budget that gives me about 4 hours a week of forensic accounting help, total. She stopped too, looked at him directly under the parking lot lights, the folder finally coming out from under her arm so she could hand him a single page, copied clean. A name and a committee designation printed plain across the top. I'll tell you what I do know. The PAC's name is Forward Florida Leadership Fund. And the chairman of that fund, far as the filings show, has been a sitting member of Congress for going on 12 years. She didn't say the name out loud. Didn't need to. Mike looked down at the page under the streetlight, at letters that hadn't meant anything to him 3 years ago, beyond a face he used to see across a witness table doing most of the talking, while Mike sat there saying as little as his lawyer would allow, and felt something settle into his chest that wasn't quite recognition, and wasn't quite dread, something closer to the specific cold click of a lock finally finding the right key after years of trying every wrong one. "You okay?" Jennings said. "I know that name," Mike said. "Figured you might. He's the reason I'm standing in this parking lot instead of riding a desk in Langley right now." Jennings let that sit a second, watching his face the way she'd watched Hammond's at the podium. The particular professional patience of someone who'd learned that the most important sentence in any conversation usually arrived several seconds after the silence that came before it. "Then I'd say," she said finally, "that you and I just became a lot more interested in the same problem than either one of us figured on a week ago." He drove home with the windows down, despite the bugs it invited in, because the air felt like it needed moving through the cab more than the cab needed to stay clean, and pulled into his own driveway a little after 10 with Mrs. Alvarez's porch light the only one still burning on the whole dark street. He didn't sleep well. Didn't expect to. Lay there most of the night running the shape of it. Reynolds, a PAC. A congressman's name typed plain on a copied filing sheet. $6 million moving quiet out of Virginia into a half-mile of Treasure Coast waterfront that had never asked to matter to anybody in Washington. And somewhere around 4 he gave up trying and got dressed in the dark instead. The beach at 5:40 in the morning hadn't changed. The tide had pulled back the same shelf of packed sand it pulled back every morning. Glossy under a sky just starting to go the color of a bruise healing. Gulls working the tide line same as always. The whole stretch of coast utterly unbothered by anything that had happened to the man walking across it. He worked the detector in the same slow arcs, heel to toe, headphones cutting the gull noise down to white static, and for the first 400 yards he didn't find anything worth bagging. A pull tab, a fishing weight, the ordinary sediment of a beach that gave up junk before it gave up treasure, same as it always had. He thought about Earl Tucker's collared shirt, and the applause that ran a little longer than the sentence deserved. He thought about Hayes, probably somewhere safe tonight for the first time in 2 weeks, sleeping in a bed that didn't rock against an anchor line. He thought about Wanda Smith and her chickens, and Jenny Baker's taillights shrinking down a dark road without ever once looking back. The same habit she'd had 3 years ago, and apparently still had now. He thought about a perfume he could still half smell if he tried, and a question she'd never once answered across 2 phone calls and 2 envelopes of cash. He stopped at the 400-yard mark, where the beach narrowed toward the jetty, and looked out at Tucker's marina, standing against the brightening sky. Masts and rigging, and Old Man Tucker's own boat tied up crooked, the same way it had been tied up crooked every single morning since Mike first started walking this stretch of sand 3 years ago. Except now it looked different to him, the way a familiar room looks different once you've learned what's buried under the floorboards. He reached into his jacket pocket, not for the envelope this time, but for the folded printout Jennings had handed him in the parking lot, the one with a name and a committee designation typed plain across the top, the one he'd circled twice with a pen he found in his truck's glove box before he ever got out of the parking lot, hard enough that the ink had bled a little through to the other side of the page. Reynolds. The sun came up the rest of the way while he stood there, gold and flat across the water, turning the masts at Tucker's marina the color of struck matches. And somewhere past the jetty, a pelican folded its wings and dropped into the surf after something it had decided, with more confidence than the evidence probably warranted, was worth the trouble of catching. Mike folded the page back along its crease, put it away, and kept walking. The end.